Hello and welcome to My Baseball History. I'm your host, Dan Wallach. My Baseball History is a long-form interview podcast where each episode I'll talk to someone new who has some sort of association to the game of baseball. No matter who I talk to, we'll talk about how they fell in love with baseball, how their career started, and how they got to be where they are today. Today's episode is brought to you by Man Cave Pictures. If you aren't already aware of who Man Cave is, you're in for a treat. They're veteran-owned and operated and run by two brothers, Tom and Chris Whitehouse, who take dirty, dusty, scratchy old sports images and bring them to fully colored life. They've been doing this for years and have mastered their technique, making their finished product unlike anyone else's. I'm telling you, the first time you see an accurately colorized photo of someone you've only ever seen in black and white before, it's like you're seeing them for the first time. And Man Cave does it better than anyone. Not only do they colorize the old photos, but they completely digitally restore them first, cleaning up any imperfections in the original. They have over 400 high-resolution images available on their website, either colorized with painstaking historical accuracy, or you can buy the fully repaired and restored images in a beautiful sepia-toned black and white. You've seen many of these images before, but I promise you, you've never seen them like this. The Man Cave team is available for commission and special project work if you're looking for a specific image to be restored, or if you have a treasured family photo you'd like preserved or brought to life like you've never seen it before. Man Cave's professional clients include the Chicago White Sox, the Oakland Athletics, the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Baseball Digest, and the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And now they're offering 15% off any order if you use the code MBH15 at checkout when you visit their gallery and store at mancavepictures.com. You can follow them on Twitter at ManCavePhotos and find them on Facebook and Instagram at ManCavePictures so you can see their latest releases, like the photo of Joe DiMaggio taking a swing during his first MVP season for the 1939 World Champion Yankees that they unveiled earlier this week. You'll get an idea of how incredible their work is when you check out their website and social media posts, but seeing these photos printed out and blown up, matted and framed in person, it's going to give you goosebumps. So head to mancavepictures.com and enter the code MBH15 at checkout for 15% off your order, no matter what size. That's MBH for My Baseball History and the number 15 for 15% off your next order. On today's episode, I spoke with Yankees legend Bobby Richardson. Bobby played for the Yankees during a stretch of American League dominance for the team. Well, I guess that doesn't really narrow it down too much, does it? Bobby played for the Yankees from 1955 to 1966, making his first All-Star appearance in 1957 and was a full-time regular in the lineup starting in 1959. During his time with the team, the Yankees won 9 American League pennants and 4 World Series, with Bobby being a major contributor on 3 series-winning teams. By the time he retired at age 31, Bobby was an 8-time All-Star and a 5-time Gold Glove winner, capturing the award every year from 1961 to 1965. He finished in the top 2 in double plays turned as a second baseman every year from 1961 to 1966, leading the American League 4 times. Yankees manager Casey Stengel once said that at the beginning of a season, he could just put Bobby out there and forget about second base for the rest of the year. But Bobby was more than just a defensive standout. He led the American League in hits in 1962 and finished second in the AL MVP voting that year to his teammate, Mickey Mantle. One of the most famous moments in his career came in the bottom of the 9th inning of Game 7 of the 1962 World Series against the San Francisco Giants. With Willie McCovey at the plate, Bobby positioned himself perfectly to be able to catch what McCovey himself would later call the hardest hit ball of his career, neutralizing the Giants' threat and winning the World Series for the Yankees. Now, that wasn't Bobby's first taste of World Series success, and it wouldn't be his last. 2 years earlier, in Game 3 of the 1960 series, Bobby hit a grand slam in the first inning. His 2-run single in the 4th inning later that game gave him the World Series record of 6 RBI in one game, a record which still stands today. The Yankees as a team shattered all kinds of records during that 1960 World Series, but they still managed to lose the series. New York won lopsided games by scores of 16-3, 10-0, and 12-0, with Whitey Ford pitching 2 shutouts. They batted .338 as a team, scored 55 runs on 91 hits, including 27 extra base hits, and outscored the Pirates by 28 runs in the 7 games. But Pittsburgh won all the close games, including a 10-9 finale, which ended in Bill Mazeroski's walk-off home run in the bottom of the 9th to win it all. But since Bobby also set the all-time record with 12 RBI in that World Series, he was named the World Series MVP, despite being on the losing team. It remains the only time that has ever happened in World Series history. In the 1964 series against the St. Louis Cardinals, Bobby set another all-time World Series record, this time with 13 hits in the series, breaking a record once shared by Shoeless Joe Jackson's 12-hit performance in the infamous 1919 World Series. In all, Bobby played in 36 World Series games in his career, including the last ever World Series game played at Ebbets Field. He also played in a record 30 straight World Series games that took place. Think about that. For 30 consecutive World Series games, Bobby was in the lineup. What a testament to not only his durability, but his impact. Bobby retired at an early age and eventually became the head baseball coach at the University of South Carolina. Often considered the father of South Carolina baseball, Bobby established the Gamecocks as a national power in the 1970s. He led the program to its first ever NCAA tournament appearance in 1974, and followed that up with a 51-6-1 record in 1975 as the team made the College World Series for the first time in program history, advancing all the way to the national championship game against Texas. During his tenure at USC from 1970 to 1976, Bobby led the team to 3 NCAA tournament appearances, finishing with a 221-92-1 record. Bobby then served as the baseball coach for the 1985 and 1986 seasons at Coastal Carolina University, where he compiled a record of 61-38 and led the team to the Big South Conference Championship in 1986. He coached at Liberty University from 1987 through 1990 before retiring with a combined collegiate managerial winning percentage of .593. In this episode, we covered lots of ground. Bobby tells us how a movie he saw at the age of 14 went on to shape his entire life. We find out what Mickey Mantle did to make Bobby feel welcome on the team. We learn what it was like to be in the clubhouse for one of the most historic seasons in baseball history. And we hear what Willie Mays said to Bobby that would have changed the course of history. With all of that information and much, much more coming at you, it may be helpful to follow along with the episode's liner notes on our podcast's brand new website. You'll still be able to enjoy the interview without the extra help, but sometimes when I'm listening to things like this, I like to really go in depth. So I've provided some photos and links to give you a better understanding of the things Bobby and I are discussing. Those liner notes can be found on the brand new My Baseball History website, which is online at www.shoelesspodcast.com. If you want to follow along, head to the website where you'll see the Bobby Richardson episode listed first on the main page under latest episodes. Click on that and you'll be ready to follow along. We've even embedded a player right into the page so you don't need to have multiple windows open while you listen or fumble around with multiple devices. And if you want to catch up on any of our previous episodes, you can click on the Season 1 or Season 2 tabs at the top of our website and see a full list of everything we have to offer to date. Everything in each of the liner notes goes in chronological order of how we talked about them in the interview, so you should easily be able to keep your place as you listen. After the interview, I'll explain how you can answer a trivia question on Twitter to win a prize, so stick around until the end of the episode for that. But now, here's my interview with Yankees legend, Bobby Richardson. You grew up in Sumter, South Carolina, right across the street from 3 schools, and your father was in the marble and granite tombstone business. Were your parents supportive of you playing sports as a kid?
My dad loved baseball, and we didn't have Little League baseball, but the YMCA sponsored what we call knee pants baseball. And so the civic clubs all had teams, and I played for those, and he was very supportive. I would go down to his place of business, usually on Saturdays when I was out of school, and made me a bat out of a piece of wood and pick up those marble and granite chips and just think that I was playing baseball somewhere and hit the ball to right field or left field. And I didn't feel too much for those granite rocks. I did that at home. I threw it up on the roof and against the concrete bricks and so forth. But my dad was very supportive, and a little later on as I played high school ball, he never missed a game. He'd sit down in the left field bleachers, never say a word, never critical, just after the game say he had a good game. And that was about all that he would encourage me in that way.
Yeah, that's great. When you were 12 years old, he actually took you to see a Cardinals game in Columbia, South Carolina. Tell me a little bit about that day.
Well, they were playing an exhibition between the Cardinals and the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds had a farm club in Columbia, South Carolina, but the 2 major leagues came in, played each other, and the one name that I knew because we listened on radio, you could pick up the Cardinal games. It was a strong radio down south, and that was the one team down south you could pick up, and so I knew the name Stan Musial. And when the game was over, we were kind of standing around a little bit, and I saw Stan Musial already dressed and starting to get on the bus. And my dad said, "Why don't you ask him for his autograph?" I said, "Well, I wouldn't want to do that. He might not want to sign." He said, "Well, go ask him. No problem if he doesn't." And he was so nice. He signed it, so legible. And I had Ina Slaughter's funeral, and Stan and Lou Brock came to that funeral, and we had dinner together afterwards in the church. I told him about that. He said, "Richardson, you're just trying to make me feel old." I said, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not."
But I've actually heard you say that how legibly he signed his autograph influenced the way you sign your autograph.
It did. I could read it so well, and I noticed so many players you couldn't read. And so over the years, I've made mine legible.
Yeah. So you went out as a freshman for the varsity team, but you got cut. Why did you get cut, and then what did you do after that?
Well, the why is because I had a 3-day workout. I was 2 weeks late going out because of basketball tournament play. Big catcher and I went out at the same time, and we had a 3-day workout. Basically, you'd run to see how fast you were. He was not fast. I was much faster than he was. Fielded a few balls. I could catch him, and he was a catcher. He was needed. And he made the team, and I didn't. The coach was very nice. He said, "Rich, come back next year." And it was a coach that just came in for that 1 year. He was military. He didn't know any of the players, didn't know anybody. And he took a look and just figured I was young. I was 14 years old at the time, and I was good enough to make the American Legion team.
Mm-hmm.
And we were good enough to win the state championship, regional championship, and play one game in sectional play before going to the American Legion World Series in Omaha, Nebraska. I did make that team, and I was playing shortstop and second base. And I remember two things. Number one, on that last game, they took our team to see the film Pride of the Yankees, story of Lou Gehrig. And
Mm-hmm.
Gary Cooper played the part, and Babe Ruth played his own part in that film, and so did Bill Dickey. I'd heard his name. He was an outstanding Hall of Fame catcher on the Yankee
Mm-hmm.
Ball Club. And I just enjoyed the film so much, and I thought, what a great organization. How I'd like to be a part of that. And the next day, we played against Richmond, Virginia, and Spud Chandler, a Yankee scout, was there, and he came over to me and came over to the coach in pregame and said, "Can you hit him some balls in the hole in shortstop? I want to see his arm." And did that, and fielded a few more. And after the game, he came up to me and said, "Now, I can promise you right now," no draft at that time, you could
Right.
sign with anybody. 12 out of the 16 gave me the same offer, which was $4,000. If you got more than that, you had to go up and spend 2 years on the parent roster.
Mm-hmm.
And so out of the 12 out of the 16 that offered me the same thing, the Yankees were my choice. I didn't talk to anybody else. The Dodgers were putting a little pressure on me, but they signed Junior Gilliam, so it turned out pretty good for them.
Yeah, but you were actually in a position when you graduated high school. You had scholarship offers from Georgia Tech and North Carolina, and like you said...
But that was in basketball.
Right.
Not baseball.
Right.
Yeah.
But the day you graduated high school, June 12th, 1953, you were 17 years old. That's when you signed with the Yankees.
Yes.
Was there any hesitation to sign with the Yankees instead of going to school, or signing, like you mentioned, the Dodgers were going after you pretty hard also?
Yeah.
How did you come to the decision to sign with the Yankees?
Because I love baseball. I knew in basketball I was too short to go anywhere beyond maybe a small college basketball player. And so my love was baseball, even though I liked basketball tremendously. I even liked it as much, if not more, than baseball. But
Mm-hmm.
I knew that my future was in baseball. It wasn't in basketball.
Yeah.
I was a playmaker. I could get the ball to the big men, and I could do that very
Mm-hmm.
well. So
Yeah.
we have an all-star team. They pick 5 players out of the state of South Carolina. In both my junior and senior year, I was the starting guard on that. But I enjoyed baseball, and sure enough, I signed the very day I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
And I rode a bus to Norfolk, Virginia. That was at that time, Norfolk Tars Class B team in the Piedmont League. It was over my head. I didn't know it until I'd been there about 15 days. I filled in for the star shortstop who was called into a reserve program of 3 weeks, and I took his place at shortstop. And at the end of 3 weeks, when he came back, I just hadn't played well, and I knew I was overmatched, and I kind of wanted to quit and go back home. And my dad came up and met with the general manager, and he laughed. He said, "No, we just started him a little bit high. He needs to go to Olean, New York, and he'll be fine."
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Olean, New York, had about 30-some games left, and sure enough, I hit .412, and it worked out so good that I skipped over the Class B and went to Class A, Binghamton, New York.
Right.
Year.
After you signed with the Yankees, you actually had some help arranging a trip up to Yankee Stadium, which is the first time that you met Mickey Mantle.
Yes. That was a gift from a fellow that owned the Coca-Cola bottling company here in Sumter. And you're right on that. I didn't go immediately. I was given a trip. In fact, he had a private plane, and he wanted to fly me to New York. And I said, "Mr. Heath, I've never been on a plane. Can we go any other way?" And he said, "Sure, we'll take the train." And so we took the train from Sumter to Florence to New York, checked into the Hotel New York, a cab out to Yankee Stadium, and for 3 days I worked out with the Yankees. And I remember going into the clubhouse for the first time, and Frank Rossetti was in the locker next to me, the coach, and he looked at me and said, "What size shoe do you wear?" And I recognized when he said that my shoes didn't look too good, my high school shoes, and I told him, he said, "Same size I wear." He said, "I got a pair I want to give you," and he gave me a set of shoes. Well, I dressed and put on the uniform, but they had carpet there, and I didn't put on my shoes. And he said, "Why don't you put on the shoes?" I said, "In here in the carpet." He said, yeah. And so I did and walked out, and he was to hit me some ground balls, and then I was to come up and take some swings with the regulars. Well, I fielded the ground balls at short and second, and then he said, "Go up and step in the cage and take some swings." Well, I wasn't about to step in front of Hank Bauer or anybody, and that's when Mantle came up and put his arm around me and said, "Come on, kid, step in here and take some swings." Mm-hmm. And it really started a friendship that lasted a lifetime. 3 days, he looked out for me those 3 days. And when I came back at 19, I remember so well. In fact, I got a picture over there. We were out in the dugout, and I was starting that day. Gil McDougall had been injured by a line drive, mm-hmm. and I was the starting second baseman. And he said, "Hey, Rich, come over here." He said, "I'm going to make like I'm showing you around Yankee Stadium, and there'll be 2 or 3 photographers who'll take a picture, and it'll be headlines in all the papers tomorrow." And 2 minutes later, click, 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 click. Next day, New York Times, Daily News. Mm-hmm. I was in there, and Mantle was pointing around. And so he really did look out for me. And then when I came back to stay, we were buddies. We didn't go out after games together. He mm-hmm. had his group, Billy Martin and Whitey went there. I roomed with Kubek in the minors and the majors. And mm-hmm. he and I and Bobby Shanton and Steve Hamilton, we had our own little group that went this way. And we were known as the non-drinkers mm-hmm. at that time. And we had a close team loyalty that we were a team all the years that I played. The thing I remember most is because those first 2 years I was up for 20 days and then maybe 30 days. Mm-hmm. And in 55, they voted me a third share of the World Series. I was only up 20 days, a third share. I was hunting down here in South Carolina and read a sporting news that I'd received, I've forgotten how many, several $1,000s. Yeah. I thought, wow, that's more than I made all year.
It's a pretty nice hunting trip.
It was a great hunting trip, absolutely.
You married your wife, Betsy, in June of 1956, and at the time you were writing letters back and forth while she lived in South Carolina and you were on the road with the Denver Bears in AAA. Betsy has said that she's grateful you started your career in the minor leagues. Do you feel that same way?
Absolutely. I think it's so good to be able to start and have a foundation, then move up and earn your way to move up. And so many of my friends start out. In fact, as a coach, I can name the ball players that played for me that were good ball players. And they started out and moved their way up. And those that really were meant to play baseball, had the ability to play baseball, moved on up through the minors to the major leagues. Mm-hmm. Others realized they needed to do something else with their life, and they would do so when they found out. Minors were important. One interesting thing is that Betsy and I wanted to get married. I was starting the season in New York in 56, and they sent me down after the season had gotten underway. And Betsy and I were planning on getting married at the end of the season, and so I said, "Betsy, I've talked to the pastor, I've talked to my manager, and they all said it'd be fine if we got married during the season." So I went to the owner of the ball club, and I can't remember his name now, but it's Bob something or other. He owned the Cincinnati Reds later on. And I asked him if I could have a week off to go home and get married, and he said, "Certainly not. Silliest thing I've ever heard. Wait till the end of the season." So I went to Ralph Houck, and Ralph said, "Of course you can. Take off, take as long as you want," he said. And the owner never said a word to me after that. And I did take a little over a week. We got lost going back, driving out to Denver from here. But Ralph always kidded at Old Timers games. He said, "Bobby was kind of wild. I wanted to get him settled down. I thought he needed to get married." He was kidding, but he was my greatest manager. I just loved the way he managed, and ended up having his funeral down in Florida after he passed away. He had a son, Bobby, and he asked me to have his dad's funeral.
Right. You mentioned this a second ago, but Yankee second baseman Gil McDougall got hit by a line drive off the bat of Bob Cerv during batting practice on August 3rd, 1955, and you were still in AAA at the time. What do you remember about the moment you learned that you were getting called up?
Well, the thing I remember is we Yankee AAA Farm Club had a lot of managers that went on to be great managers. They were players then. Tom Lasorda was one of our coaches on that ball club. Whitey Ford was a coach on there. Darrell Johnson, who coached the Red Sox, was on there. Whitey Herzog was on there. And, of course, Ralph Houck was on there. Johnny Pesky also was a coach. Mm-hmm. He ended up, of course, Red Sox, Pesky pole in right field.
Right.
When I was called up, Ralph told me that he'd made the arrangements. I'd be leaving, and he gave me the flight. And it just happened Pesky's wife was on that flight, sat by me. And all the way from Denver to New York, we talked about Major Leagues, how it was, and what to expect. And she was so kind, so nice. he had been sort of a mentor, Johnny Pescat, to Kubek and I. He kind of took us under his wing, worked with us, and we became friends that lasted a lifetime.
Yeah, that's great. When you did finally get called up and Mickey showed you around Yankee Stadium and you've got that photo up from the New York Times and all that, do you think he did that because he wasn't treated that way by Joe DiMaggio when he got called up and Mickey didn't want people to feel that same way about him?
Well, I never thought about the connection with DiMaggio, but I understood that Mickey didn't just do that to me. He did it to a lot of young ball players.
Mm-hmm.
Some we'd take down to the hotel with him when they didn't know where to find a place. In my case, we had relatives in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and so we had made arrangements for a home. We stayed at the hotel right by the stadium for a while during those short times I was up there, but my first full year, we had relatives that would find us a home in Ridgewood, New Jersey to rent. And so I went across, and then I was in a carpool with Mickey one time and with Yogi one time, Ralph Houck.
Wow.
Jerry Coleman also lived in Ridgewood, where I was at.
Mm-hmm.
Mountain lived there too, but I didn't go in the carpool with him. He didn't want to leave the stadium at night. He didn't want to come back home.
Right. So you made your Major League debut August 5th, 1955 at Yankee Stadium against Jim Bunning and the Detroit Tigers. You went 1 for 3 with a walk, a steal, and a run scored. What do you remember about that day?
Well, I remember that I didn't touch the ball. There was no ball hit to me the whole game, and so I was kind of nervous for that first one that never did come.
Uh-huh.
But I do remember stealing second base, and I remember that Yogi hit a home run, I think, that we won the game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the only hit I got during the time that I was up there. I'm not sure, but that was a thrill to get my first hit at Yankee Stadium and to feel a part of the team.
Yeah.
And when I sat down, I knew McGill had gotten well again, and I should be going down. And I didn't mind going thinking, well, they're going to call me back up one of these days.
Yes, they did.
Yes, yes.
You were originally signed as a shortstop, but when you got to the Yankees, Casey Stengel reminded you that they happen to have this guy named Phil Rizzuto on the roster. This was a team that had won the World Series every year from 1949 through 1953 and was about to start another streak of 4 straight World Series appearances later that season. What was it like coming to that juggernaut of a team, trying to earn a spot over guys like Billy Martin and Jerry Coleman and Gil McDougald? What was that like?
It was a difficult time. In fact, I was so discouraged a little bit because I could see where it was a tough assignment for the coach. He had to pick who was going to play, and he wanted the best player out there, and I was not the best player at that time. And so he picked the others, and I actually went to the front office and with Ralph's permission and asked George Weiss if he would mind trading me. I'd like to go. Jerry Lumpy had gone to Kansas City. Norm Seaman had gone to Kansas City because they weren't playing. They were in the same boat I was in. Mm-hmm. And they had traded both of them. They got good players back in turn. And it was Frank Lane was always trying to get me. He was in Cleveland. He always wanted to send 2 pitchers, Don Mossy, and I've forgotten the name of the other one, to me. But George said, no, we're not going to trade you. We're not going to send you down. You stay right here. You'll get your time. And that was encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did stay, and I'm sure glad I stayed. I tried to talk the second baseman, what was his name now, the good hitter, the left-hander, went to Seattle.
Cano?
Robinson Cano. Yeah. Later on, I told him, I said, you don't need to go somewhere else. You need to go in the Hall of Fame as a Yankee.
Yeah.
He didn't. He went to Seattle, and I really felt if he stayed in New York, it would have been a wonderful career for him.
Yeah, definitely. You became a regular in 1957 along with Tony Kubek, and Tony described you as having terrific range, being able to go back on pop-ups and come in on bunts, but he said what really made you special was that you may have been the quickest second baseman ever in terms of turning the double play. What was it like having Tony as a teammate, and why did Casey Stengel call you two the Milkshake Twins?
Well, Tony is special. In the minor leagues, we roomed together and kind of, in a sense, kind of grew up with him. You know, we started out together, and Ralph was our manager, and then Ralph, my whole career was with Ralph. He came up as a coach, manager, general manager, and back to manager. Mm-hmm. But Tony was very special, and I didn't know he said those things. That's pretty nice of him to say that.
It was later in life, but
yeah. Okay, well, that's all right. That's okay. What was the last part of the question now?
Why did Casey Stengel call you guys the Milkshake
Twins? That's what I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
That all came about because we would clinch pennants so often with maybe a week or sometimes 2 weeks left in the season. And the Yankees would hire detectives to come and follow some of the players, Mantle, Ford, Billy Martin, some of the ones you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't follow them. They'd get in the cab, get out the other side, and the next thing you know, they lost them. They had to turn a report in, so they followed us. And we went to the YMCA and bought some popcorn, had a ping pong tournament, and then ended up with a milkshake and came on home. And we were dubbed the Milkshake Twins. Tony didn't like that as much as I did. I didn't mind it.
Yeah. The infield of Clete Boyer at third, Tony Kubek at short, you at second, and Moose Skowron at first is regarded as one of the finest of that era and possibly of all time. What made you guys so special together?
Well, let's start at third. Clete Boyer was honestly one of the best fielding third basemen in all of baseball. He had Brooks Robinson to contend with, so Brooks would get the Gold Glove each year.
Mm-hmm.
But Clete was so good and such an accomplished, he would make the double play for you. He'd always give you the ball at the right place. I only missed 2 double plays where I got hit. I actually made the double plays, but I had 5 stitches one time. Both of them, Clete gave me a low throw, and I stayed with it, made the double play, but I had 5 stitches. From Frank Robinson, he just was a very aggressive runner, and he was faster than I thought he was. But Tony was just consistent. That's what I liked about him. He was just tremendously consistent. He could go in the hole. He had a strong arm. He could make all the plays. So different than Rizzuto. When Rizzuto was there, played a little shallower, got rid of the ball so quick that he would still throw him out by a half or maybe a full step at first base. But he did it with an arm that would just get over there.
Yeah.
But it was fun to make a double play with Rizzuto. He'd get you the ball quick, and it would always be easy to handle. And Kubek was that way, too.
Mm-hmm.
And Scarron at first was just an outstanding player. He paid me $500 a year to catch all the pop-ups. Never did give me a check, though. He said he was going to each year. But he was fun to be with and a power hitter that hit so many balls to right field and for home runs. I was kind of sad when they traded him, but I knew Pepitone they thought was going to be the first baseman in the future, and they wanted to get Stan Williams at that time, who they felt was a help to the club.
Right, yeah. 1959 was the only season in your first 10 years with the Yankees that the team didn't make the World Series. Billy O'Dell was one of your old quail hunting buddies from South Carolina. How did he help you hit 300 that year?
Billy and I did hunt together. We both loved the outdoors and continued to be friends out of baseball, and then ended up he was the pitcher that in 1962 against the Giants, he was going for his 20th win when McCovey hit the ball to me.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, Casey Stengel came over to me before the game and said, "We just found out you're hitting .299. The Yankees don't have a single 300 hitter. And if you can get a hit up first time up, we go take you out of the lineup and make sure we have at least one 300 hitter." Word sort of got around that I needed a base hit, and Billy was pitching, and he sent word over. "I'll be throwing it right in there for you tomorrow." And Brooks Robinson picked up on it. He said, "I'll be playing real deep if you want to bunt." And the catcher was, I think, Joe Ginsberg. He said, "I'll tell you what's coming." And then the first base umpire just said, "Make it close at first base."
Mm-hmm.
In other words, "I'll call you safe if you can make it close." And then the first time up, I had a line drive to right field, and Albie Pearson, who really was my best friend, made a diving catch.
Right.
He didn't get in on it. But then I got 2 hits, and he did take me out of the lineup, and I hit 300.
But what does that say about you as a person that even your opponents were like, "Come on, we're going to help you out here"?
Well, the game didn't mean anything. But, I just had such a rapport with my own players and with some of those teammates.
Mm-hmm.
Brooks Robinson and I have been friends for years, and his son moved down to Myrtle Beach, and he was working. I got to know him. He's head of the Alumni Association.
Mm-hmm.
We do things together. Jim Bunning, he and I were at the funeral together with Steve Hamilton. I had so many, and then I was active in Baseball Chapel, so I got to know a lot of the opposition through that program.
Mm-hmm.
I would speak occasionally at the Baseball Chapel.
Right. You had 26 RBI in 150 games during the 1960 regular season.
That's not very many, is it?
It took you 61 games to get your 12th RBI that year. But then you guys made it back to the World Series, and you had 12 more RBI in just those 7 games against the Pirates, which remains the all-time record for most RBI in a single World Series.
Bobby Richardson pulls a long drive to left field. It sails over the head of Gino Samoli, and it's in there for a triple. Vera and Blanchard tally to make it 11 runs batted in for Richardson in the series. It's a new record for runs batted in a World Series. After Blanchard doubles in the Yankees' 7th, Richardson cranks out another triple. It drives in his 12th run of the World Series. Richardson has just broken his own record.
Well, actually, I've been real fortunate in World Series play, and I hold a record of RBIs in World Series games, 12 RBIs in a 7-game series.
Well, how about that?
What got into you?
Well, number one, every time I came up, their bases were loaded up two or
helps.
3-1. That does help, because if you'll notice, I also got 9 hits in a 5-game series and didn't have a single RBI against Cincinnati in '61.
Right.
So the men have to be on base. But it's something about a World Series that's special, and they were special to me, and I enjoyed every one of them tremendously, especially from 60 on through 64. Those World Series were all special to me.
Yeah. In Game 3 of the 1960 World Series alone, you had 6 RBI, which is still the all-time record for most RBI in a single World Series game.
It's the bottom of the first, and the bases are loaded with Yankees. 1 out, and the count on Richardson is 3-2. Bobby smashes a hard drive to left field, and Samoli goes back, but he doesn't have a chance.
It's a grand slam home run for the littlest Yankee of them all. Scoring, Skowron, McDougal, and Howard ahead of him, and the New Yorkers lead 6-0. The Bombers congratulate the Mighty Might, who hit one other home run back on April 30th.
What did Casey Stengel say to you when you got back to the dugout after hitting your grand slam in the bottom of the first?
Well, to be honest with you, it was the bases loaded, 1 out, 1 run in. We were ahead 1-0, first inning.
Mm-hmm.
And they would change pitchers. Vinegar Ben Mizell started the game, and they brought Clem Labine in to pitch to me. When I was walking up, I was listening, because Enos Slaughter always sat on the bench right by Casey Stengel, and he was the pinch hitter. And occasionally, even in the first inning one time, he said, "Hold that gun." That meant come on back and let Enos Slaughter hit. And I was listening for that as I walked up. I was batting down at the end of the lineup. I thought, well, he didn't say anything, so I went on up to home plate, looked down at Chris Eddy, and he had me bunting. I couldn't believe it. That's not a good play. Pitcher coming at bottom of the order coming up. You already had first inning. But anyway, tried to bunt and fouled it off. Not intentionally, but fouled it off. And he put it on again and fouled it a second time. Just couldn't keep it fair. And then he hollered down. He said, "Try to hit the right field. Stay out of the double play." And I was trying to hit a ground ball to the right side when Clem Labine threw the fastball in here. And I hit it pretty good, and I thought, man, oh, man, I hit that pretty good. And when I was rounding first base, Gino Samoli in left field had already gone to the fence, and he was turning around looking at his glove, and it looked like he caught it. It looked like he was taking the ball out of his glove, but then I saw the umpire doing that. Well, when I went on around third, and my teammates that were on the base stayed there and congratulated me, went in and got to Stengel, he said, "Good bunt." But I do remember the other time when he pinch hit for me in the first inning, and this time I walked by him and I said, "Why did you start me if you go pinch hit for me in the first inning?" He followed me right in the clubhouse and said, "Get your little mitt and go down the bullpen and warm up Ryan Duran."
Yeah, he's the one who manages the team, right?
Yes.
That's what he said, yeah. You were happy when Roger Maris was traded to the Yankees before the start of the 1960 season, but not because he was a great home run hitter or a great defensive player. You hated the way he broke up double plays against you. With all the pressure on Roger and Mickey to break Babe Ruth's home run record in 1961, was it easier for you and your other teammates to just go out and do your jobs that year?
It was for us because of the home runs. They won so many ball games. I remember some special times when Mantle came up. He missed some games, of course, and I remember sometimes even during that year that he would come in as a pinch hitter and hit one out of the park. And it was special, but it was tough on Roger. Mickey knew how to handle it. He'd been there before, but Roger just had no peace at all. The only peace he had was when the game was going on, when he was actually playing the game. He was losing his hair, and just every question would be the same question. You have these small hometown, like the Sumter Daily Item would go up there, and they'd all ask the same question. Right. Now you go break Babe Ruth's home run record. And he's a shy person, but he can get mad too, and he sometimes gave him sharp answers, or something like that. And he didn't care about the record.
Right.
He didn't even want to start the last game of the season when he had a chance. And Ralph made him, and I was so glad when he broke it. I remember we had to push him out of the dugout to go up and just nod his cap. He and I got to be really close friends. He came by and spent several nights with me here, and he'd come to Pinehurst to play golf, and got to know his family real well as well. But
yeah.
It was tough on him, but Mickey was pulling for him too. Everybody thought there was some little grudge. There was nothing. Mickey's just the most gracious person I know, and he was pulling for Roger to break that record.
So I'm assuming you've seen the movie 61.
I saw parts of it, and I didn't appreciate the movie as much as, now I know Crystal very well, and I knew that when he was growing up, he liked me as a second baseman, but his favorite was Mickey Mantle, of course. But I felt like the 61 movie didn't show the gracious side of Mickey. It showed the other side a little bit more than it did. He would fly across the country and do a benefit for Frisch Burkell, who had battled with cancer. Came to Sumter, and he and I raised enough money to build a YMCA in Sumter. Came back another time to Columbia when I was coaching over there and did a clinic for 8-year-old boys.
Wow.
And we caught up with one of those boys that was 8 years old. He was 48 years old, 40 years later. We asked what it was like having the icon of baseball giving you instruction. He said, well, I remember one thing. When it was over, we asked Mr. Mantle if he'd take one swing. And he said, batting right-handed, he hit the ball out of the park, over the football field, into the parking lot. He said, you hopped up and said, no, stop, we got to do this. My car's parked over there. But Mantle would do those things.
Yeah. In 1962, you made the All-Star team. You won your second consecutive Gold Glove.
Willie McCovey hits the ball hard in the hole between first and second. Richardson spears the ball, regains his balance, and flips to first, retiring McCovey and ending the inning.
You led the American League in plate appearances, at-bats, hits, and sacrifice hits, and you had career highs in batting average, runs, doubles, home runs, RBI, walks, total bases. Let me take a breath here because there's a lot. On-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS. It was a pretty good year. You've said that your biggest thrill in baseball wasn't something that you actually accomplished or experienced yourself, but something that Mickey Mantle said about you after that 1962 season when he was voted the AL MVP.
I didn't realize it. Mickey hit his 30th home run on the last day of the season, I think it was. And Mickey, if you look at the schedule that year and look when he played and when he didn't play, missed a lot of games. But when he played, we won. And when he didn't play, we didn't win. It was that simple. With all of, he said, Bobby should have won this. Well, that just meant so much to me. But in my heart, I knew he should have won it, of course. And I would be the first one to tell anybody that any time. But it was an honor that he passed on my way, and I appreciated it so much because he had a special relationship with me. And DiMaggio did, too. He came back as a coach, and I got to know him real well, and we developed a friendship over the years. And he, too, came down to Sumter and did some things for me.
Yeah. When you're a little kid, you're always taught to be ready in case the ball is hit to you, to always be thinking about what you're going to do and how you're going to react if the ball comes your way. The highest leverage plate appearance in the history of baseball was Willie McCovey's at-bat in the ninth inning of Game 7 of the 1962 World Series.
The final game of the 1962 World Series. The series is all tied up, 3 apiece. Yankees ahead by 1 run. But San Francisco has Matty Alou on third and Willie Mays on second. 2 out in the last of the 9th inning, and big Willie McCovey stepping to the plate. A single will give the game to the Giants. McCovey hits a sinking liner just 1 step to Richardson's left. The game is over. The Yankees win and reign as world champs of 1962.
Tell me what Tony Kubek said to you before McCovey hit that ball and what you were thinking about.
Well, we had Willie Mays had doubled to right field, and Roger made a tremendous play. We had just a deluge of rain, so that it was really wet in right field.
Right.
And nobody knew it, but Roger had a sore arm at that time, and I went out a little bit more than I'd usually go out. Tony and I had talked about it ahead of time. He said, if it's hit to right on the center field side, he said, I'll go out, but if it goes to the right field cone, you go out a little bit farther. I did. He made a great play, turned around and relayed it to me, and I threw it home. And the third base coach held Alou at third base. So McCovey came up with 2 outs, Willie Mays on second. The manager came out to talk to Ralph to see if he wanted to put him on base and then pitch to the right-handed Orlando Cepeda. And I walked over to the bag, and I was standing on the bag with Willie Mays, and Tony said, I sure hope McCovey doesn't hit the ball to you. And I said, why? He said, you've already made 1 error in this series, and I'd hate to see you blow it now. Well, we're close enough to know that he's kidding. Willie started laughing. You know? And then I walked back over. On the very pitch that he hit the ball, the umpire, National League umpire, said, hey, Rich, can I have your cap for my little cousin? And I didn't have time to answer him. The ball was hit. I caught the ball, went down with it, made sure I had 2 hands on it completely. And then I took my cap off and flipped it to him. And the picture in the New York Times the next day had him with the cap and me walking without a cap to give the ball to Ralph Terry.
Yeah, that's incredible. Joe Pepitone once said that you made it easy for him to play first base because you would always tell him where he should be positioned defensively. But Ralph Terry, who was on the mound for the Yankees that day, and Willie McCovey actually both thought you were out of position before that play that ended the 62 World Series. Why did you think you were right where you needed to be?
The reason I moved over so much is because, if you remember, he hit a foul ball.
McCovey.
His bat was way out in front, and he hit it foul. Hit it hard. I mean, it was really hit hard. And I moved over a little bit. And well, Ralph said he actually took a step out to move me over. And then he said, well, he's played 1,400 games there, and, maybe he knows something I don't. And they didn't think I should have moved over. McCovey didn't either. He told me the same thing. You were playing out of position. I said, well, I just didn't know it. I'm sorry. Uh-huh. And he told me later, I didn't see him for 45 years. Mm-hmm. When that was over, I can't believe we did this, but there were 4 of us that paid our own airfare to get home early because it was the end of the season and we'd be going home. Our wives had all packed and everything, and we would take off the next morning. And so Don Blanchard and I can't believe Boughton was in there, and Tony and I. Seems like there were 4 of us. And we had a car waiting for us, and we took off and didn't be a part of a celebration or anything, got a plane and went back to New York. But anyway, the thing I remember the most is 45 years later, I got a call, and they were going to play a new stadium in San Francisco. And they were calling different Yankees to come out and play in an old-timers game. Nobody wanted to go. Yogi didn't want to go. Whitey didn't want to go. It's tough to fly all the way across the country. They just pay you expenses. Yeah. And they think you enjoy it and you want to be there. And most of them said no, and I said no, too. I just said, I appreciate it, but I think I'll have to say no. Well, so many said no that Alvin Dark, who is my close friend, was living in South Carolina, and we were very close friends. And he called me up and said, I know you don't want to do it, but he said, we need for you to come out. They want to have a banquet the night before the old-timers game. They were playing the Yankees. And they said they want you and McCovey to both speak at the banquet. So when I got there and I walked up, when I saw him for the first time, he said to me, he said, I bet your hand's still hurting. I said, you hit it hard. You hit it hard. And then we both threw out the first pitch the next day at the same time. And,
cool.
And then he sent me a picture not long before he died. And he signed it, Best Wishes, Willie McCovey. They were doing a statue of him to put up with the other Hall of Famers there at the stadium. The guy that was doing the statue was a friend of mine, and so he brought the picture back from Willie.
Cool. I heard another story where Willie Mays told you one time, years after the fact, that if he were on first base when he hit that double instead of a Lou, what did he say to you?
Well, it was Joe Morgan couldn't come to a glove presentation for the Rollins Gold Glove, and so I had 5 in a row, and so they asked me to come and make the presentation to the Boston and the Cincinnati second baseman. And while I was there, Willie came up to me and he said, now, Bobby, I can't see too good. Hold my hand so I can know that I'm talking to you right in your face here. He said, I want you to know that if I'd been on first base, when I hit that ball to right field, I'd have scored. I wouldn't have stopped. I'd have scored, and we'd have won that game. I said, you probably would have. You probably would have.
Yeah. But you made a great relay throw. I mean, Roger made a great play in right and a great throw to you, but you turned right around and threw a strike right to Elson Howard.
I did, but the one thing, and you'll notice that if you see it, the ball hopped a little bit, and it was a little bit higher, which would have given him a chance to slide
underneath.
Yeah. Now, whether or not we'd have gotten the ball in time, it was accurate, and it was quick. Yeah.
In the 1964 World Series, you had 13 hits, and that broke the all-time record for most hits in a single World Series, which had been shared by Shoeless Joe Jackson since 1919, when he had 12 hits against Cincinnati. What was it about you that when the lights were their brightest, you always came up so clutch?
Well, somebody reminded me the other day that 7 of those hits were off Bob Gibson.
Yes, they were.
But
you
I made
7 for 14 that World Series against Bob Gibson.
But I made the last out on Bob Gibson.
Yeah, but 7 of the first 13 before that were in your favor.
Well, what a competitor he was.
Yeah.
And he was, as you probably know, Harlem Globetrotters in basketball, he was just all around. He and I sat on the board together with Bat, and he was a very gracious person. He did a lot of things people don't know about, giving money to those that had needs in that time. But anyway, the toughest pitcher I ever faced, I think I enjoyed playing in World Series competition. I really did. But Sandy Koufax in that one game in '63 in the World Series.
Right.
Were you going to talk about that?
Yeah.
Well, I sat by him at Yogi's funeral. I sat by Whitey Ford's wife. Whitey didn't come to the funeral. He just wasn't feeling good and said, I can't go. And Sandy Koufax was sitting by me, and his wife was with him, and he said, when I struck you out the first 2 times, I knew I had good stuff that day. And then he got me the 3rd time when I was trying to be a first ball hitter. Well, he also got Kubek 3 times, and he got me 3 times. And when I walked by Mantle in the on-deck circle, he said, no use for me to go up there. And he got him 3 times, too.
Right.
He had good stuff that day.
Yeah, and you didn't strike out often in your entire career.
No, I got a hit off him in the 4th game.
Right.
He was pitched the 4th game, too. I think 1 or 2. I'm not sure which. But anyway, I got a hit off him.
Yeah. What was the atmosphere like at Yankee Stadium back then, with those great teams and Bob Shepard's voice over the PA system?
Your attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome a Yankee star for many years, Bobby Richardson.
I mean, your hometown had 12,000 people, and then you get up to the big leagues, and the Yankee Stadium held 67,000 people. That must have been something.
Well, it was something. A lot of folks would come up from Sumter to ball games, and they couldn't believe it themselves. And I was that way as a player. You know, here I am playing with Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and Yogi Berra, you know. And I said, boy, I'm just so grateful that I'm here and a part of the team. And the thing I appreciated, they were so professional. They dress good on the road. They don't have their name on the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
All the other teams do.
Right.
We traveled by train in those early days, and you could go into the dining car, but you had to wear a sport coat and a tie. Now they wear dungarees, you know, and they did at that time, some
right.
of them. But the Yankees were always professional. You can't have facial hair.
Right.
You look good that way, but that was just their rule.
Right.
I remember the Boston guy came over from Boston that had the beard. When they told him how much they'd pay, he shaved.
Yeah, Johnny Damon.
Yeah.
The team installed an organ at Yankee Stadium in 1965, and Toby Wright played for your final 2 seasons as a Yankee. Do you remember what it was like to hear the organ and how that changed the experience inside the stadium, or are you too focused on the game to even recognize things like that happening off the field?
Bob Shepard was special.
Yeah.
That was special, but I don't remember the organ.
Interesting.
Didn't even notice they came and made a difference. So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
What was it like just playing in New York in those days? I mean, that era is so romanticized by fans and writers and historians today, and you were there. You were a part of it, and a big part of it. Did it seem real at the time, and does it seem real looking back, or is it just like a fever dream that lasted 12 years?
Here's what I really think. If you open up any one of these letters right here, they'd start out by saying, "We hope you're doing well in this pandemic." And then they'd say, "My grandfather was a Yankee fan. My father was a Yankee fan. And in this pandemic, we're huddled up going over his memorabilia.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a Yankee fan, too." And they'll say something special about the Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me realize, even now, 50-some-odd years later, it was a special time.
Oh, yeah.
It really was. Now, my wife came into the game. She would come in and sit with the wives and just enjoy it. Everyone was on television, every game. My dad was a baseball fan. His health was such he couldn't travel. But on Saturday, the game of the week, he would get to see all of those games. He died in 63, so 62, that season was special to him.
Yeah.
But it was a special time. And I recognize it when you talk to people. And I realize the other clubs can't say what the Yankees can say. They can't say that we were the Pinstripes, we won 9 out of 10 years during the time you played, you know.
Right.
And so it's special, and I know it is, and I appreciate the fact that I've been a part. And I enjoyed the Old Timers games. I played my first Old Timers game. I was 31. You might have it later, do you?
Yeah, but we can talk about it now, yeah. You said that guys like Tris Speaker and Ty Cobb coming in and getting dressed in your locker room was a special thing for you. What do you remember about those Old Timers days, and why did you think that they were important to happen?
Because I knew their names. I knew that they were the ones that set the pace for us, and they at that time were the stars, or they wouldn't have been invited back. Mm-hmm. And I remember that Ty Cobb was in my locker, and I remember the overcoat he had on. It was a kind of a cold day, and he had a black overcoat. And then going to the museum, I found out what all he had done. I wasn't aware of what he had done with his life financially for the young people in the state of Georgia.
Yeah.
It was just heartwarming because I had seen a film and they made him look bad in the film.
Yeah.
But sort of like Mantle, I thought that 61 film didn't talk about the good things that he had done in his life, and there were so many of those.
There were moments later in the film, if you do watch the rest of it one day, it really shows his sentimental side, and he becomes a great teammate for Roger and a cheerleader, and is the one who rallies the team around to really get Roger to get that last home run. So,
well, see, I cut it off because of that first part. I had little granddaughters with me and so forth, and I thought, man, they're talking too much about that, and I didn't turn it back on.
It's worth watching one day if you've
I'll
got
see
a
it
chance.
again. I will.
On April 9th, 1965, you played in the first ever game at the Astrodome, but you didn't bat leadoff like you normally did. Why not?
Because there's a guy by the name of Mickey Mantle, and he's from Texas, and they wanted him to be the first one to hit a home run in the Astrodome.
Uh-huh.
And so he did. Second time up, I think, he hit a home run. And I've got a picture of me shaking Mickey's hand, congratulating him for a home run. And they asked, were you betting fourth that day? I said, no, I was betting second.
Right.
Oh, I remember that so well, and that picture meant a lot to me.
What was it like playing inside for the first time?
It's hard to see the ball. That's
Yeah.
what I remember more than anything. Do you know who the second baseman was, believe it or not, at that time for Houston? It was Nellie Fox. The
That's
last
right.
part of his career,
Yeah.
he was over there. And I can remember one play. I could see it coming and wasn't able to complete it. A ground ball was hit between first and second. And the runner on second was really fast. And I knew he was going to try to score, even though I knew I could get to the ball and field it. And I turned and threw it, and he beat it. But that's what I remember about the Astrodome. That, and I couldn't see the pop-up
Yeah.
when it went up. Now, I went back to the Astrodome.
After they painted the roof.
Well, yeah, but Billy Graham had a crusade in the Astrodome. And the president, which would have been President Johnson at that time, Kennedy had just been, but Billy Graham had a crusade, 50,000 people there in the president's attendance, and I was able to share my testimony.
Wow, yeah. It's incredible. How were you able to navigate a friendship with Mickey during your playing careers when your off-the-field lifestyles were so wildly different at the time?
Well, they were different, and yet they weren't. He grew up in a church, a Baptist church in Commerce, Oklahoma. And he used to go to Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday services. So he had that background in the beginning of his life. We had a private deal down in Scottsdale, Arizona. All the Yankees were invited down. Johnny James was a pitcher on the Yankees. He had the job in charge of a big mall, and they were doing something for kids. And they were the charity. It was benefit for all our coming. And he called, and they had a guy that would just say, now, what do you ordinarily get when you come? And I told him an amount that I thought was reasonable, and I met for the whole time. He thought I met for each day, and we were there 3 days.
Oh,
it
wow.
was 3 times more than I thought it was. There was a private dinner we had, and Mantle had been drinking a little bit at that time, and he got the microphone, and he started talking, and Betsy and I were there with him, and he looked over and said, Betsy, you know I love you. And he said, I want you to know I grew up in a church and told about going to church. And he said, then I got to New York, and that big guy, and he pointed to Hank Bauer, taught me how to party. And he said, I know you not, and his agent was sitting with him. He was living with her at that time. But he was just so humble and so open, and just and so what I'm saying is, and I can vouch for it in this way, Watson Spolster was a sports writer in Detroit, and he used to call me when we'd get to town. He'd say, hey, listen, this Sunday, I know a church is going to have an early morning service. You can get back in plenty of time for batting practice. I'll come by the hotel, and if the guys want to come. And I'd always ask Mantle. Kubek would go with me all the time. And we'd ask Mickey, and Mickey said, you know me, I'll be out. He said, if I'm not there on the dot, you go ahead. 3 out of 4 times he'd be there on Sunday. He'd go with us. And so we got along great. We didn't go out to eat after the ball games. He would just have been embarrassed for me to go. In fact, he was embarrassed. He wouldn't ask me to come to the clinic they had down because of the drinking. But after he died, his boys asked me to come, and we had a wonderful time down there.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think it's easier or harder to be a major leaguer today compared to when you were playing? Mickey and some of the other guys wouldn't have been able to live their lives off the field in nearly the same way if they were under the same constant scrutiny as today's players. But do you think that actually helps players focus on their craft today, since social media would expose them if they partied the same way that those old guys did?
I've never really thought about that, but it would probably be more difficult today.
Really?
But I think the money would make up for it.
Yeah.
I think that the millions rather than the thousands would make the difference, and they wouldn't mind that exposure, and they could probably secretly do things that they were doing in the open a little more.
Yeah.
One of the things I didn't appreciate was Boughton's book, because there was a sports writer that was involved in it too, that wrote the book with him, and those were things that were said not to print. They were things
off the record.
Off the record,
Yeah.
right. And most of them were half-truths. And for that reason, Boughton was never invited to come back to Yankee Stadium for old-timer games until they lost a daughter, and then Mickey said, hey, let him come back.
But that was kind of breaking the code, you know? Those things that happen in the clubhouse or off the field or behind closed doors, that's not meant for people to know.
That's right.
That was a groundbreaking book in a lot of ways, both positively and negatively.
I didn't read it, but I read the part that was serialized
Yeah.
in Look magazine or whatever it was.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can go by.
You were on the field for some of the biggest moments in baseball history. Bill Mazeroski's home run in the 1960 World Series.
There's the drive at the deep left field. Look out now. That Ball is going down. World Series another. And they're resting. Hits it over the left field fence for a home run, and the Pirates win it 10-9 and win the World Series. And the fans go wild. The Pittsburgh Pirates are the champions of the world.
Roger Maris's 61st home run in 1961 to break Babe Ruth's single-season record.
Here's the windup. Fastball hit deep to right. This could be it. Way back there. Holy cow, he did it. 61 for Maris. And look at him fight for that ball out there. Holy cow, what a shot.
While you didn't hear them live, surely you've heard some of the iconic radio and TV broadcast calls of those moments after the fact. What is that sensation like? Do you hear those moments from the perspective of a fan, or are you put back in the time and place where you're on the field reliving what it was like to be playing?
I think it's a combination. I think today it would be as a fan watching today's ball games, but I think by the same time I could say I was there for that.
Yeah.
You know? And I remember it so well. I remember that I was one of the ones that kind of pushed him out to nod his hat after he hit that home run. He didn't want him to go out and even do that.
Another standing ovation for Roger Maris. And they want Maris to come out and take another bow. He does. And he's coming out again. Man, if his teammates are pushing him out there, he wants to get down, they won't let him. One of the greatest sights I've ever seen here at Yankee Stadium.
Why did you think it was important for him to do that, though? Why was
just
it?
to acknowledge the fans. They were giving him a wonderful cheer. They were all standing. They were continuing to chat. They wanted him to come out because of the length of their cheering. And he needed to go out, and he did. Even that simple way, that was what they wanted.
Yeah. You and Tony Kubek had planned to retire together. How did the Yankees bringing in Bobby Mercer change those plans?
Well, first of all, Tony and I had been talking about it for a long time. We started talking about it after the '64 season, and both of us decided that we were going to retire. We'd won 9 out of 10 years.
And you were 29 at the time.
29, yes. 29 years old. But our family was growing. And 161 games, then you add spring training in, you move your family 3 times a year. It was more difficult as my kids got older.
And a World Series every single year.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that was the best part because my wife would always go to the World Series. She went to Pittsburgh and St. Louis. She went to all the places. You know, enjoyed. Not both times if you go twice, just once, and they'd let them go.
Yeah.
But Tony and I both decided, and Sports Illustrated heard about it. They sent a photographer. There's the picture right there that he took, and had it pinstriped just like that. Tony did that, and then it was all set up. And Ralph Houck signed Bobby Mercer. He had moved up as general manager.
Right.
And he signed Bobby Mercer to come on board. And he said, now I know what your plans are. He said, but I want one of you to play one more year. Doesn't matter which one, either one of you would be fine. And so we talked about it and prayed about it. And I said, I really want to retire. And Tony said, I do too, but I'd be willing to go one more year. And so as soon as he said that, about a week later, he got called into reserve program where he had to take a year off, so he wouldn't have been there. And so Ralph called me and said, we got a gentleman's agreement, one of you do it, and he can't, will you play one more year? And I said, I'll be glad to.
And luckily you hadn't submitted your retirement papers to Major League Baseball yet.
I had not.
Right, because that would have been an issue.
Because you can't come back in until after April.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I remember talking to Roger about that. Well, I guess that was the next year, '66. When he was going in Ralph's office, he said, I hate to go in here. I have no idea what's up. He said, but I'm just tired. I'm going to retire. I'm going to do the same thing you did. I said, you shouldn't do that now. I said, you ought to wait. I said, if you'll wait till after the season and see what their offer is, it might even be a trade deal like, you ought to wait. Because if you do that now, then you can't come back until after April, whatever it is. It's a later date. You have a waiting period in there. And he said, well, maybe I'll do that. So he went in, and that's when they traded him for Charlie Smith. And he was really devastated. Then he went over there and just had 2 wonderful years.
Right.
And gave him the beer distributorship, and man, oh man. I got a Christmas card from his wife. I get him one every year. 50 years later, when they honored Roger at Yankee Stadium, she was asked any 5 teammates you want to come back, we'll take care of all the expenses and so forth. And I was one of the 5.
Wow.
And went up and had a wonderful time together. Bob Cerv, of course, was there, and Mickey was there, and Whitey.
Tell me then about the contract that you did sign when you decided that you were going to be the one that stayed.
He just said, "How much you want me to pay you? Here's a blank contract."
Ralph Houck said
Ralph
this?
Houck said, "Blank, just fill it in. Whatever you want's fine with me." I said, "Well, Ralph, I didn't have too good a year this year." I said, "The team didn't do well." I said, "If you don't mind, the same as last year would be fine with me. If that's all right with you." He said, "I'll do it." Well, instead of doing that, he did put the 45 is what I was making this, but he gave me a 5-year contract, 4 at 15, so it was 60 and 45.
Right.
And so I made $5,000 more than Mickey. Oh, man. But I mean, that's Ralph. And I said, "Well, now, wait a minute. What are my duties?" He said, "Your only duty is to come down to spring training on the first year and speak to all the minor league players." Boughton heard about it, and he said, "I'd like to do that too, Ralph." Ralph said, "Over my dead body, you will."
I like how humble you are, though, saying that you didn't have too good of a year that last year. In 1965, you played 160 games. You had your career high in walks, the second most doubles you ever had in a season. You made the All-Star team. You finished in the top 20 in MVP voting and won your 5th straight Gold Glove. And that wasn't a good year for you?
I didn't realize that, and I didn't think it was. I thought
you should have negotiated that contract a little bit better.
I thought I played like the team played.
No, you played great.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the most encouraging thing I've heard. I had no idea. I just wish a couple of years in there, I was hitting 270. I just wish I could have reached 270 instead of 266.
Okay, that counts then.
Okay.
You were only the 10th Yankee to have their own day at Yankee Stadium, and you were able to stand in the same spot to make your speech as Lou Gehrig did when he made his Luckiest Man speech.
Who could forget that day? September the 17th, 1966.
Friends, this is Bobby Richardson Day at Yankee Stadium. Down through the years, 9 all-time Yankee and baseball greats have been honored in ceremonies on this historic field. But no player ever deserved a day in his honor more than our guest today, who makes number 10. And without further ado, Bobby Richardson.
Thank you very much, Red. You know, as I think of baseball and the memories that I've had in the past 10 and a half years, I think of the many experiences that I had and have had on the field. And with these experiences, I think of the opportunities on the field and the opportunities off the field because of baseball. And with opportunities, I'm thankful for the responsibility that has gone along with these. And in closing, I can only say, as Mickey Mantle has said, as Lou Gehrig has said, how lucky it has been for me to have been a Yankee. To God be the glory. Thank you very much.
The game before Bobby Richardson Day, there were just over 9,000 people there. But on Bobby Richardson Day, there were more than 21,000. How did that feel?
Well, there were a lot of banners around and so forth, and it's humbling. It's humbling. And the thing I appreciated most, they allowed me the freedom of saying how important it was for me and how the Lord played a part in that. It's unusual for a Yankee ball club to let Billy Graham's world-famous singer come in to sing How Great Thou Art at Yankee Stadium. Mm-hmm. And Cliff Barrows, who was his song leader, led in the national anthem, and the 3 evangelists were there. And I was able to say, like Lou Gehrig, only I added, "To God be the glory." And they allowed me to print a testimony of my faith and to pass it out at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
That's only been done one other time, to my knowledge. And you know who did it?
No, who's that?
Mickey Mantle's wife in Cleveland for an opening day. She threw the first ball out, and I'll give you a copy of it. Here it is right here.
Wow.
And she passed these out, and I send one of those in every fan letter that I get. I buy 5,000 at a time. Just take it with you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, that's great.
But it's humbling. It really is. And
yeah.
And the Yankees have been so good to me over the years, and they invited me back at 31 for the first Old-Timers game. I've been invited every year since.
Yeah.
And when I wrote him the letter, I guess it was 5 years ago, time flies, and I said, I'm 80 now, and I just don't travel as much. And he said, I got your letter, Greg King, but he said, did you get my email? And I'm not good at looking at my emails. I have a flip phone. And I said, no. He said, go back and look at your email and call me back. And I looked at it, and he wanted me to come up a day early and stay a day late, and he was going to pay me more than I made my first 2 years with the Yankees.
So you're like, all right, what flight would you like me on?
That's right. That's what I told him. But I said, don't do this next year.
Right, yeah.
And he didn't. So.
Paul Dietzel hired you to become the head baseball coach at the University of South Carolina, but you had actually turned him down twice before you finally agreed. Why did you turn him down initially, and then what made you decide to finally accept?
Well, number one, I had a contract with the Yankees paying me $15,000 a year. I had done a job with a Liberty Life Insurance Company. They were paying me $15,000 to do 5 color commercials a year. Any more than 5, I'd get a $1,000 commercial. And those were very effective, and I was enjoying doing that, and I had the freedom of not having to go somewhere every day, and I'd never thought about coaching at that time. And then when he came the third time, I was ready. I said, you know what, I'd really like to try it now. I'm glad you came back one more time. And I really enjoyed. I was just introduced to the team in 1970. They did not have a good club. They were not putting a big emphasis on baseball at all. Assistant football coach was just the baseball coach as well. He's the one that recommended me to Coach Dietzel. And I really enjoyed it, and I found out recruiting was easy. I thought that would be the thing I'd hate more than anything.
Well, you kind of got lucky with that because you had some pretty nice connections through baseball, and that helped you turn the program around. Who were some of your big recruits?
Well, the biggest recruit for me was a pitcher by the name of Earl Bass. Now, my introduction to Earl Bass was on an off day. I flew from Washington to Florence, South Carolina to speak at a Little League banquet that was global. I mean, it was all the states were involved in it. They were playing in Florence, South Carolina. And I got down there, and Jerry Clower, you don't know who that is. He's from Kalamazoo. He's the funniest guy in the world. He's just one of those guys. And his son was playing. And I sat by him, and he said, Richardson, he said, I've looked at all these players. One stands out head and shoulders above all the rest. He said, this is his number, but I don't know his name. I said, I can find that out. And I found out his name was Earl Bass. He was from Columbia. And I found out he was an excellent ball player. I kept his name in mind, and the first one I recruited when I became the coach was Earl Bass. Talked to him, and he played for me, and he was All-American.
But you also had Phil Rizzuto's son.
I forgot about that.
And Whitey Ford's son, and Al Worthington's son.
And I called Yogi, and Yogi said, no, he's going right to the big leagues.
Right.
Yes.
But that was also the same story with Wade Boggs.
And Tino Martinez. Yes,
right.
Yes, I forgot about that.
What was it like making those phone calls to your former teammates? Or were they calling you saying, hey, can I send my son to you? Or did you know they had kids and you wanted to make that call to them? How did that happen?
It works both ways. For instance, Catfish Hunter, I called his son, but he said, I want to go to junior college. I'd like to sign in 2 years. So I called him, and I understood that. The other guys were junior college players, and I realized when I got to Carolina, the best program at that time was Georgia Southern, and then later on Mississippi State. Ron Polk was the coach at both places. And Ron had to realize that he needed to get junior college players, and they had 2 years experience.
Interesting.
And that's where I got Tito and Wade Boggs and some of my other players as well.
Yeah.
I saw Wade Boggs in an old-timer game, and I said, do you think you made the right decision not signing with me? He said, let me think for a minute. He said, I'm making $14 million. Yeah, I think I did.
Yeah, 3,000 hits. And USC ended up playing the Yankees one spring thanks to a promise that Lee McPhail made to you, but he actually underpromised and over-delivered. What's the story there?
Well, the story there is Lee McPhail has a sister, Larry McPhail's daughter. Larry McPhail used to own the Dodgers, and then he owned the Yankees. And Lee was the general manager. And so I was close with the family. The sister used to come down and spend the summer with us. She was a wonderful Christian. We got along well, and she was just a lovely, lovely girl. And so I knew Lee real well. And so when I called him up and said, Lee, I want to be a baseball coach, but I have to have a release from the Yankees before I can coach college ball. He said, now, wait a minute. If you want to, you can come back. You can be our major league broadcaster, or you can be our AAA manager, or you can be our major league coach. Any one of those interests you? And I said, no, the travel's the reason I got out.
Right.
He said, well, when you get settled, just give me a call, and we'll bring the Yankees down, play your ball club. And 3 years later, we lost to Miami by 1 run in regional play. And when I called him, he said, "We got a problem." And I thought, that's no. And he said, "We're traveling north with the Mets." And I said, "I understand that." And he said, "Would it be all right if the Yankees and Mets come play your ball club?" And I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yeah." And Yogi was managing the Mets.
Right.
And so I drove the bus out to pick up the Mets. And Yogi said, "What are you doing driving the bus?" And I said, "Well, we just get it from carpool." And I said, "I just wanted to keep you safe. I didn't want you there." And he laughed. He said, "What are we doing?" And I told him, he said, "Well, I pitch at bat practice every day. Let me pitch to your ball club. That'll even things up." He said, "Your pitchers can pitch against our guys." He pitched both games to me. We beat both the Yankees and the Mets. And I just sat up in the stands and broadcasted the game. And the fans, we had 12, 15,000. They all stuck with us as fans. So it just made our team.
What a day, yeah.
And when I left, I don't know whether you know this or not, I'd recruited Mookie Wilson. And they finished second in the nation with the team that I left them.
Right, yeah. Your hiring at USC was really a watershed moment for that program. It's a clear demarcation from a long, barren spell into the modern period, which has been incredibly successful. I mean, you took a program that was bad before you got there, and you brought them to their first ever NCAA tournament in 1974, and then all the way to the College World Series final in 1975. Are you more proud of continuing the Yankees' legacy of greatness, or are you more proud of starting something new at USC, which has now continued for nearly 5 decades since you left?
I'm proud of both. I felt like that's 2 different separate careers for me. And I was proud of the fact that the Yankees received me as one of their own. And I knew I was a little different. I love the Lord, and I knew that the Yankees were noted as a team that enjoyed, but they accepted me in a wonderful way. When we'd clinch a pennant, they'd have the champagne to do that. They'd have a Coke bottle for me to go around if I wanted to do it. And they laughed. I mean, we were laughing together, but we had a rapport with each other. And it's the same way at Carolina. At Carolina, I was just introduced to the program, didn't do anything the first year because the team was already there. Mm-hmm. My first recruit was a catcher from Sparta, North Carolina. He married my cousin and became my pastor at my church, but he was a wonderful catcher. Uh-huh. Senior year, didn't make an error all year.
Wow.
And every one of the recruits was kind of special to me. And I got to know them. We did things together. So both of them are highlights of my life.
You had some pretty incredible coaches and managers when you were playing. Casey Stengel, Ralph Houck, Yogi Berra, even Bill Dickey. You mentioned Joe DiMaggio earlier. What did you glean from each of them that informed the way that you coached your players?
Well, I think it started in the minor leagues because that's where Ralph Houck took over. My first manager was Mickey Owens. We were dead last place, Norfolk, Virginia. I was not playing well. I don't remember much about him other than it was a very difficult time for me. At Binghamton, I remember it started getting a little better, and then from Denver I went to Ralph Houck, was my AAA manager 2 years, and Ralph is my all-time favorite. He is a man's man, if ever I met one. He went into the Green Beret as a private, came out as a major. He's probably the toughest guy I've ever met. I remember one time we clinched a pennant. Ryan Duran had been drinking a little bit, and Ralph was smoking a cigar, and he pushed his cigar in and said, "We did it again, Ralph." Ralph picked him up with his right hand, hit him one time with his left hand, knocked him out, put him in a roomette and locked his door and said, "We'll wake him up in the morning." He's the toughest guy I've ever met, but he's got a soft side. And just I patterned my coaching after Ralph Houck, not Casey, not anybody else, just Ralph Houck.
Interesting.
And he's a people's, and I was a player's coach.
Give me a great Casey Stengel story.
Well, the best story I know about Casey Stengel was when they had the antitrust laws, and he was in Washington, and he talked, double talk for about 25, 30 minutes, maybe longer than that. And then Mantle followed and said, "Mr. Mantle, what are your thoughts on the antitrust?" He said, "I agree with Stengel," and it just shook everybody up. You know, for 2 hours he'd been double talking, and for Mantle to say that, everybody laughed.
Tell me about Bill Dickey's influence on your career.
Bill Dickey was a hitting instructor. He just took a special interest, and he would walk me through in the on-deck circle. What are your thoughts in the on-deck circle? Are you looking at the pitcher? Do you recognize what he's throwing, what his best pitch is? On the bus, on the train, on the plane, we would talk about nothing but baseball. And I'm sure that had so much to do with my year that year. It was a special year for me.
And he encouraged you to use a heavier bat.
Heavier bat.
What was his reasoning there?
Well, he wanted me to hit a line drive, but to get it with authority through the infield. He knew I wouldn't go hit home runs, and the heavier bat prompted me to not get under the ball as much, to try to hit more ground balls that would get through in a hurry, or line drives.
Interesting. Who was Hank Small, and how did he make you a better coach?
Hank Small was a player I recruited from Atlanta, Georgia. He was the player of the year in Georgia. His father was a Delta airline pilot. And I remember going into his home and just sitting down with him and saying, Hank, now I know that all the Georgia schools are after you, everybody else is after you, but South Carolina, I'm the new coach, and I'd sure like to have you as a part. And I know you've got some brothers, and they're younger, and I'm sure they'll be good ball players as well, and I want you to come down. He came down. He was absolutely the best college player that I'd ever seen. Probably Earl Bass was the best pitcher. I'm talking about all the colleges around the country.
Yeah.
You know, in the College World Series, we beat Arizona State. We beat all the good teams. But Hank Small was special, and so much so that when I became the athletic director and baseball coach at Coastal Carolina, I called Hank and asked him if he would like to be my assistant athletic director and my assistant baseball coach. He said, Coach, I can't believe this. If 2 weeks ago you'd call me, but I just accepted a job with an insurance company, and I just won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
And I had his funeral, too. I had all my All-Americans' funerals. 3 of them have already died.
Yeah, what a shame. You had this incredible success as a player. Your team went to 9 World Series, and you won 3 rings.
A pennant ring is just as pretty as a World Series ring. It doesn't have the big diamond, though.
So you won 12 rings, 9 pennants, and then 3 World Championships.
That didn't get rings the first 2 years.
Okay.
55 and 6.
Okay.
All the other years.
But technically you were on the team, you just weren't on the World Series roster for those first 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
You were an 8-time All-Star, you won 5 Gold Gloves. You led the league in hits one year, and you have multiple individual World Series records. But surely there were hardships along the way. What was the lowest point in your career?
The lowest point was the minor leagues when I first signed at 17, and I got to Norfolk, and I just didn't do very well.
Yeah.
The thing I remember, it was segregation time, and I wasn't used to that. It was just I didn't like the fact that some of them couldn't do things that we could do and so forth. And I remember it turned out Elston Howard became my best friend. My son's best friend was Elston's son. We just got along wonderfully together. But the low point was because I just didn't do well, and I thought I was outclassed and wasn't cut out to be a baseball player. But when my dad came down, the general manager got together, and he laughingly said, no, we just started you too high. You need to go to Olean. And I did well, hit 412 up there, and bypassed that league. That was the lowest point. And then earlier, when I wasn't playing at all, I really wanted to play, and when I went to the Yankees, but the encouragement that George Weiss gave me when he said, I'm not going to trade you, but you just wait. Be patient now. You're going to get a chance to play.
What about after you had reached the majors and had a little bit of success? Was there a point later on in your playing career that you were like, man, I'm not pulling my weight, or I feel like my skills aren't up to what I think they should be? Were there ever struggles after that you went into slumps or anything like that?
No, I never had that, to my knowledge. I never had that in all my years. I never had a time in the major leagues where I ever heard a fan get on me. Now, I was out at second base. I'm sure if I'd been at first base a little closer, they probably would have, but I wasn't listening for it. And it's amazing how you can shut things out at a ballpark like that. Roger, for instance, in right field, right behind him, and they were giving him a fit. And I knew the others. But to my knowledge, I never was gotten on too much. And I never had a bad enough slump that I was discouraged. I remember one time I had the measles. I missed 4 days. I didn't miss too many games. When I missed those 4 days, Phil Lentz had a wonderful 4 days. And I thought, man, I got to get in bed in a hurry.
You turned into Wally Pipp.
That's right. That's right.
After having such integral parts in so many historic moments in the original Yankee Stadium, did you get emotional at all when they tore it down?
I did, to the extent that I felt like they should have kept a shell up and put a Little League field in it or something of that nature. Now, in Pittsburgh, they just put a home plate, but nothing at Yankee Stadium. I guess it's a parking lot. I'm not even sure what it is. But I just felt like there were so many things that could have been done historically for Yankee Stadium. I hated to see it tear down. Now, when you're playing the new stadium, if you're a player inside, you can't see too much difference looking into the stands and so forth. But when you get in the new stadium, the museum, the steakhouses, it's wonderful. And it just makes it so much more commercial than I thought it was at the old stadium.
Is it crazy to you to think that some people go to work and they work in an insurance office or an office building or have a cubicle, and when you went to work, you were going to Yankee Stadium?
Well, I've never thought about it that way, but that's pretty good. When I left home in Ridgewood, New Jersey, it would be usually a carpool with Ralph Houck and somebody else, and we'd be talking baseball, and we'd go in and go into our locker room and start playing something we loved.
That's pretty cool.
I can't believe how much fun it was.
Yeah. When you dream at night, Do you dream of playing at Yankee Stadium again, or do you dream that you're coaching, or do you dream that you're quail hunting? What goes through your mind when you're just reminiscing?
Not as much now, but there was a time when the one dream that was reoccurring is that I was in New York and I was lost, didn't know where I was. I was trying to get to Yankee Stadium, and I knew this team was starting to play, and that I wasn't there, and that Horace Clark or whoever it might be would be out on the field. And I had that dream several times in a row, and it kind of went away after that.
Interesting.
But I'd always come in, and it'd be the third inning or something like that, and they'd say, "Where have you been?" I said, "I've been lost." Oh, and I say that because coming from Sumter, I knew the way to Yankee Stadium, of course, but I didn't go downtown too much.
Yeah. Do you have any regrets about your career, or wish that things had gone differently, or anything like that?
I have one, probably Mantle and I have one thing in common, and that's the fact that he regrets that he didn't hit 300. I think his average is, 298 or 299, something like that. And I just wish I'd made 270. and if I'd quit the year before, it'd have been 270, but that's all. No, I have no regrets. And I have no regrets about leaving early, even though I could have played another 5 or 6 years.
Right.
I'm sure I could have.
Easily, yeah.
But the Yankees were so gracious to me to have a day at Yankee Stadium. And I don't know how many times I was honored, whether it was the American Legion or the Lou Gehrig Memorial Award or whatever it was. There was their own thing at Yankee Stadium,
Right. You won the Lou Gehrig Memorial Award in, I think, 1963. And then you won the Pride of the Yankees in 94.
Right.
So, yeah, you've been honored a number of times by a pretty important franchise.
Yes.
When you first came up, your first 2 years, what number did you wear?
29.
And then your third year you wore?
17.
Okay. From that point on, for the rest of your career, you wore number 1. Back then, was there this same reverence and importance put on the single-digit numbers for the Yankees like there is today?
I don't know if any time it was ever talked about or thought about or anything. And you know who made the decision on the numbers?
No, who's that?
Pete Sheehy,
Okay.
the clubhouse guy.
Interesting.
Isn't that something? And what happened, Billy, of course, went over to Copacabana, and they had a party, and they didn't have enough money to cover the drinking bill. And so Billy, knowing him, he just signed the owner's name to the check, Dan Topping. And they didn't want to do anything to Mickey or Yogi or thing, so they made him the scapegoat. Billy and I got to be good friends, and I called him up and I said, would you come down to Coastal Carolina, and we're going to have a golf tournament, and we got a guy giving us 2 Chevrolets, and we got somebody else giving us the lights for the field, and I'd like for you to play in a golf tournament with them. And he said, absolutely, you can count on it. And he came down, and we had an auction. He bought everything in the auction, gave it back to the university, and he and my wife were just buddies. They spent some time talking together about the Lord, and we just had a wonderful time. And he wrote a letter. I'll show it to you when we leave. And he said, number 1 has been assigned to both of us. He said, it's been retired now, but I want you to know in Old Timers games you can wear that number as long as you live. And if he hadn't written that, I couldn't have worn it either. Like Rizzuto, Kubek can't go back and wear number 10.
Right. Despite how the Yankees franchise talks about their history and treats their history, and they have things like Old Timers Days, there have been a number of instances where players or managers have had a pretty unceremonious ending to their tenure with the Yankees. Guys like Casey Stengel and Yogi Berra and Billy Martin and Billy Martin and Billy Martin.
5 times.
Did knowing that those things had taken place influence your decision? Like, did that make you want to retire on your own terms at all? Or was it purely a decision because you wanted to be with your family?
Just family.
Interesting.
Didn't even think about the other at all. I didn't want to be a hanger-on. I saw so many players hanging on. Mantle shouldn't have played the last 2 years. They talked him into it because of the publicity he would generate. And his average would have been where he wanted it, and he was embarrassed those last years.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of people just hanging on way too long. But I was a little bit early.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would like to talk about, or any other great stories that, when you think back, when people bring up your playing career or they want you to tell a story, what are the first things that come to your mind, or what are the things that people normally want to hear about when you talk about what you've experienced?
They always talk about the Grand Slam, and we've talked about that, and they talk about McCovey's catch. Then they enjoy talking about Mantle.
Yeah.
And he asked me at Roger's funeral if I'd have his funeral, and of course I would. We had to find the church. We found the church, and
right.
called Bob Costas to do the eulogy, Roy Clark to sing, and Kubek was there with me and helped me in those hours.
I was honored to be asked to speak by the Mantle family today. I am not standing here as a broadcaster. Mel Allen is the eternal voice of the Yankees, and that would be his place. And there are others here with a longer and deeper association with Mickey than mine. But I guess I'm here not so much to speak for myself as to simply represent the millions of baseball-loving kids who grew up in the 50s and 60s and for whom Mickey Mantle was baseball. And more than that, he was a presence in our lives, a fragile hero to whom we had an emotional attachment so strong and lasting that it defied logic. Mickey often said he didn't understand it, this enduring connection and affection. The men now in their 40s and 50s, otherwise perfectly sensible, who went dry in the mouth and stammered like schoolboys in the presence of Mickey Mantle.
Why did those responsibilities fall on you for Mickey's funeral? Why were you the person who had to end up handling those things?
Well, let me tell you why. I had the eulogy for Roger Maris's funeral in Fargo, North Dakota.
Right.
Now, they had something at the stadium later on that Steinbrenner put on. I was not involved in that, but his wife called and asked if I would have the eulogy and represent all the Yankee players. And I did so, and I knew that he and Clete Boyer particularly were very close, very close. And Clete was sitting by me in the audience. I was to go up and have the eulogy after. He asked if any players wanted to say anything. And Clete wanted to say it, but he didn't have the courage. He'd never spoken, in public. And I just said, Clete, you really need to say something? And I said, let's stand up. I stood up and pulled him out, and he did a wonderful job. He was so glad he did it. But anyway, when the service was over, and it was so cold that day, we got on a motorhome going back to the hotel we were staying at. Mantle sat down by me. He'd been a pallbearer, drinking a little bit at that time, and he sat down by me and he said, I want you to have my funeral. Now, he made his mind up in there at that funeral, I want you to have my funeral. I thought it was something that would just go away, and I don't remember answering him too much. But I saw him about a year later. He had a golf tournament in Greensboro, Georgia, and I went down, and he said, don't forget now you to have my funeral. And he said, you two boys come, I have two boys with me down there, and he said, you boys ride with me, you can see your dad anytime, come on over here and ride with me. And then every time I saw him after that, whether it was an old-timers game or New York, and then it came to the point where I was in Dallas. I was with the baseball assistant team. I was on that board. We met around the All-Star game in Dallas. And the phone rang about 5 o'clock in the morning, and Betsy answered, and it was Mickey, and he said, I want Bobby to pray for me. I'm in the hospital, Baylor Medical Center, and I want him to pray for me. And so she handed me the phone, and we had prayer together. And I shared a verse with Mickey that kind of hit home that day. I said, Mickey, there's a great verse in Philippians. I said, I like the Phillips translation. It says, delight yourself in the Lord. Find your joy in him at all times. Never forget his nearness. Then it says, tell God in detail your problems, your anxieties. And the promise is the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep our hearts and minds as we rest in Christ Jesus. He said, thank you. And Betsy went out and spent the next 2 days with Merlin, his wife. And it wasn't long after that, but I came back home to South Carolina. But not too long after that, he called and said, listen, I'm at the end. I want you to come and be with me in the hospital, you and Betsy. And so we did.
Well, I guess it was a little bit later, and I said, Mickey, you remember your day in New York? You had heard me use a little poem called God's Hall of Fame. You talked about using it that day. He said, yeah, I should have. I said, no, I'm not sure that was the right time, Mickey. But I think it is the right time today. It says it all. It says your name may not appear down here in this world's Hall of Fame. In fact, you may be so unknown that no one knows your name. The trophies, the honors, the flashbulbs here may pass you by, and neon lights of blue. But if you love and serve the Lord, then I have news for you. This Hall of Fame is only good as long as time shall be. But keep in mind, God's Hall of Fame is for eternity. This crowd on earth, they soon forget the heroes of the past. They cheer like mad until you fall, and that's how long you last. But in God's Hall of Fame, by just believing in his Son inscribed, you'll find your name. I tell you, friend, I wouldn't trade my name, however small, that's written there beyond the stars in that celestial hall, for every famous name on earth or glory that they share. I'd rather be an unknown and have my name up there.
What a special friendship.
Well, it was, but I've had that special relationship I've had 10 of my teammates, 9 or 10, I'm not sure. And everyone's different. For instance, Enos Slaughter, he had a daughter born in Valley Hospital in Ridgewood, same day as my son was born, same doctor, and she's the one who asked me to have her dad's funeral. He was in Duke in the hospital. I went up and visited him up there. And then Moose Gowan, his daughter, asked, Kubek and I both had a part in his funeral.
Right, yeah.
And everyone was different. Roger, his wife, had asked me, I said that. And then Bob Turley, and then Jim Kite and Whitey. Now, you've read a part of my book, haven't you?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Delves into a few things.
Who were some of the players that you played against in those days that you either enjoyed the challenge of playing against them, or, you know, you'd see the schedule coming up and be like, oh, great, this guy's coming to town. You know, I've got to face him in the batter's box or anything like that.
One opponent that I admired was Al Kaline. He just played the most consistent right field, great hitter, didn't say much, very quiet, but just a great ball player. Gave 100% all the time. I've got a picture over here that 1963, and you're probably aware of this, they have an American League All-Star team, but they have a National League, and then they pick a dream team. Did you know about that?
No.
Just one from both the American and National League. I didn't know about it either, and somebody sent me the picture the other day, and they have me on it as the second baseman.
Cool.
And I'm with Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, Sandy Koufax. I'll show you the picture.
Pretty good company.
Bit. So those are pretty good names right
there.
But I've gotten to know so many of the opposition because I've spoken at Baseball Chapel. And when they come into Yankee Stadium, George McGovern is the chaplain for the Yankees. And you speak not only to your home ball club, but you speak for the opposition as well. So I've gotten to know a lot of the guys. One of the guys that I got to know real well was Ted Williams. He and I shared a program together, American Legion Baseball. He was a great American Legion Baseball player, and he and I shared a program together. So we got to know each other. And then we both made the All-Star team one year in San Diego, and we rode back from San Diego to New York and sat by each other and talked all the way back. Now, what we have in common, he's an outdoorsman.
Yeah.
Quail hunter. And we talked, and he started telling me about Mr. Yawkey. He'd go down, and he gave him 2 20-gauge over and unders, and he was shooting quail with him. And I know Mr. Yawkey. I've hunted down there, you know. And so we had so much to talk about. And so when he would come in to New York, he'd slide into second base, and he'd say, how many bird dogs you got? You shoot a 28-gauge over and under? And I've got a picture I want to show you because he and Jim Hegan were close friends. Jim Hegan was a catcher for Cleveland. He and Ted were good friends. He's the one called Bob Feller and all those guys. Well, anyway, before a ball game with the Yankees and Red Sox, he's giving instruction. He's really talking about golf, but in the picture it looks like he's giving instruction. And then it's got an AP wire under it. In this particular game, Mantle hit 2 home runs. Ted hit a home run. And the Yankees beat them 5-6. And I was 5 for 5 with a home run. Now, the reason I remember that game so well is that I don't play golf, but Joe Garagiola and Rizzuto talked me into going and playing golf before the ball game in Boston. And the first swing I took, the ball sliced and went over in the clubhouse, and I could hear something break, you know, and they said, go get the ball. I said, no way, I'm going to get that ball. But anyway, I played golf, and I went 5 for 5 that night. And so I wrote on there, the Boston Red Sox have asked that Ted Williams not give Bobby Richardson any more instruction before Yankee Boston games. I'll give you a copy of that.
That'd be great, yeah.
It's a neat picture. But Ted and I got to be good friends.
Yeah, and there was a moment, I believe it was at a Hall of Fame induction ceremony, that you and Ted got to sit at a table together and talk, and a couple other pretty important players came up and joined the conversation. Johnny
Bench was sitting by me, and Ted came in a wheelchair. And because we were friends and talked, he came right over, he stood up, and we started talking about hunting and fishing and different things like that. And then we were joined by Yogi and Koufax, and it seems like there was one more. And Johnny got up and took a picture and sent it to me about a month later. I was there to have the prayer for the Hall of Fame. I've been up 3 times to do that. When Rizzuto went in, when Nellie Fox went in, and when Johnny Bench went in, I was asked to have the prayer at Cooperstown. Ted and I just... we used to all watch him when he'd come up to batting practice, just like they'd watch Mantle.
Right.
You know, so,
did you ever become complacent? Isn't the right word, but was it ever hard to recognize how incredible your life and career was while you were in the middle of it?
No, and I'm not trying to be humble when I say it, but it just was so natural that everything took place like it was supposed to be that way, and I really didn't think as much about it. I realize now It was a great life.
Yeah.
I during the time I was playing, you know, it was tough. We had 2 children and changed homes 3 times a year, spring training for 7 weeks, go to New York, then rent a place up there.
Right.
Station wagon with all the kids in it going back and forth and not making at that time. My first year I made $5,000 and $7,500, and I went to college for a little while and then had to get a job. But all the time I was enjoying it tremendously.
Yeah.
The Lord has taken care of me in a wonderful way, in every way financially. They gave me on my day, it's really funny because young people see that film now and they laugh at it. It was a Dodge Monaco station wagon. It looks like a box now, and they always laugh when they see that film.
What do you think your legacy is? And 20 years from now, 50 years from now, what do you hope people say about you when they talk about you?
Well, I don't think there'll be much talk 25 years or 50 years from now, but I think I have 2 legacies. I think because of baseball, it afforded me a platform that was unbelievable in other ministries, like Billy Graham. Now, Billy Graham wouldn't have invited me on national television in Hawaii to take 5 minutes in one of his great programs that goes all over the world. They still see and they're doing reruns, I guess is the right word now. And to go to Japan twice and to speak before Billy Graham in Japan, to go out to all the baseball training camps and to get on a fast train and go down from the Tokyo Giants, go to the World Series over there and then speak for Billy Graham in there. And then the Astrodome, as I mentioned earlier, with the president in attendance. And I can think of 100 other times. I've got an unusual situation, and I don't want you to think that I'm telling you this in the wrong way, but the first time I was ever asked to speak was a Rotary Club here in Sumter. A doctor asked me to speak, and I got up, and my mind just went blank. I said, you know, I can't think of a thing to say, but if you got any questions about baseball, I'll be glad to answer them. And they asked questions. They get along fine. 4 or 5 years later, I won the Golden Gavel Award from Toastmasters International. Walter Cronkite won it the year before. And here was a guy that 4 years earlier, you know, my mind just went blank. And I didn't have a thing to say. And
so did the Rotary Club call you back and be like, where was this guy?
No, but because of that, I have actually spoken all over the world.
Yeah.
Every state in the Union. You can name any key, whether it's Miami or Detroit or Chicago or Dallas or Fort Worth, New York. I've spoken at the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast there. I've been to just about all the major churches in the country. And when Reagan was president, I think I told you General Mark Clark and I headed up South Carolina for Reagan, so I got to know him real well. And when he won, he said, what can I do for you? And I said, not a thing. I said, I'm just glad you won. You've been a good president. He said, well, do something for me. He said, I want you to visit on the National Day of Prayer as many bases as you can. And so he arranged for me to go to Taiwan. He arranged for me to go to Tachikawa Air Base in Japan, Patrick Tinker in Oklahoma, just probably a dozen around the country. And these are things that I'm remembered most about, not so much baseball, but baseball plays a part in it too.
Of course, yeah. Initially, when you were invited up to go to Yankee Stadium when you were 17 years old and you said you didn't want to get in a plane, would you say that you overcame that fear of planes?
Yes. Did you know the Yankees were the last team to fly, though?
Yeah, I did know that.
That's because we had a traveling secretary that didn't like to fly. He was from Augusta. He always said we had too much cargo. If it went down, we'd lose too much. But that wasn't the case. He just didn't like to fly.
Where was your favorite stadium to play on the road?
Kansas City. And the reason for that, they had the best infield.
Interesting.
They had a ground crew that was the very best in the country, and whatever the ingredients they used made just not too many bad hops.
There was one year at Yankee Stadium where the infield wasn't too great.
60. It was a big holes, patches. It was just terrible.
What happened?
Something got in, and they just couldn't do it, and they'd replace it, and it would get the same way.
Yeah.
I've got the film of how bad it looks. It was terrible. Even in the infield, everywhere.
Yeah. Interesting.
I've got Coca-Cola sponsored with the highlights of all the World Series that I played in. And it was on 16 millimeter reel at first, but now they've transferred it into CDs.
How often do you watch stuff like that?
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. The only thing that I might watch, they used a little clip that we put together that shows some of the RBIs and so forth when they introduced me to when I was speaking and so forth.
Yeah.
But that's the only time. And I'll make light fun of that, you know. But the Lord has just given me unbelievable opportunities and rapport with my teammates, and I'm just grateful for, and a wonderful wife of 65 years.
But you've taken advantage of those opportunities. I mean, there's a lot of people are given opportunities too that they don't capitalize on, or their personality isn't such that they make those connections with their teammates or friends or people that they come in contact with, and you clearly have. The fact that you've spoken at so many teammates' funerals and all these people reach out to you, it shows who you are. And you told me earlier you get 10 letters a day.
It's averaging 10. I got 23 one day last week. And they're baseballs. They send baseballs. They send, of course, most of them are cards.
You retired 55 years ago.
I know it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
So this is a testament to who you are as a person. You know, obviously you had a great career, but there are guys who don't get 23 letters a day 55 years later.
And that's the thing about it. They're from all over the country. I mean, it's not just New York. It's just all over the country.
Well, I think you mentioned this earlier, how every Saturday the Yankees were the game of the week. Yeah. And so that was obviously the great success of the franchise had a lot to do with it. But the fact that you were on TV around the country every single week, people got to watch you play. And
that's the only way my dad saw me play.
Right. So, of course, you're going to be a fan of the team that you get to watch all the time. Yeah. And it didn't hurt that you guys won every year, you know. But
there was a group that didn't like us because we won too much. I understand that. Yeah.
When you were growing up, who were your idols that you looked up to? I mean, Phil Rizzuto was one that I know you've talked about.
When I was 12, Stan Musial, and I knew his name, and I kind of looked up to him, of course. I had Enos Slaughter's funeral, but Stan Musial and Lou Brock came in, and then we had dinner together.
So what was it like when you were a kid looking up to those people, and then later in life you became their equals and contemporaries, and you could sit at a table and have a conversation with these guys with shared experiences?
You know, I know exactly what you mean, and it was so natural. For instance, the last 3 or 4 years that I went up to the Old Timers game, for some reason, maybe it's because my whole career was with them, Betsy and I would have dinner with Yogi and his wife and Whitey and his wife. So I was one of them.
Right.
But at the same time, I always felt like I was younger and I wasn't a part of them. But, you know, they accepted me as one of them, of course.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And I've never thought too much about it, but as I look back, you know.
Even the fact that you were friends, like legitimate friends with Mickey Mantle. I mean, Mickey Mantle isn't even a person to most fans. He's an idea. He's a concept. And you're like having dinner with him and friends with his family, and you know, like that's
he came down here. We gave away 2,000 Mickey Mantle bats, and we raised enough money to build a YMCA.
Exactly. And that's how close you were.
Came to the university. He had a giving spirit. I couldn't tell you how many times we were together somewhere.
Doing some research for the interview, I saw a video on YouTube of you and Hank Small, and Mickey came down, and he's given a little batting practice instruction and things like that. So, yeah, your relationship continued well after, you know, your first meeting at 17 years old when you came up to Yankee Stadium. So that is incredible. It's something that a lot of people are envious of, I'm sure.
Well, I appreciate it, but at the same time, I don't look at myself like I look at Mantle as a real star. You know, he was just a wonderful guy. I feel like that I was a part of their team. I was accepted by the team, but I was never really, I was just an average ball player on a great ball club. I look at it more that way. And I earned my position. Jerry Coleman Jerry taught me how to make the double play. And I could make the double play as good as anybody because of Jerry Coleman. He called me, one thing I regret, he called me when he was inducted in the Broadcasters Hall of Fame and asked if I'd come to San Diego. And I had something I couldn't get out of. And I said, Jerry, I am so sorry. I said, call Tony. He said, I've already called Tony. He said he's not going to be able to come either.
In your high school yearbook, I think your junior year, when it asked, what do you want to do when you grow up, you wrote that you wanted to play shortstop for the New York Yankees. You played 21 games as a shortstop for the Yankees.
Did I play that many?
Yeah, but most of your career is as a second baseman.
My dad only saw me play one game. It was against Milwaukee. And Gil McDougall went up to Stengel and said, I just don't feel good today. I feel like I'm too close to the hit at third base. He said, let Bobby play third. Let me play second base today. And so the one game my dad saw, I played third base and went 0 for 3 against Warren Spahn.
Wow. What an era you played in. All these guys that you're mentioning, Sandy Koufax and Bob Gibson and Warren Spahn, it's the who's who of baseball history, and you played with them and against them. It's just incredible.
Well, I'm realizing more now. while I was doing it, it just seemed normal.
Yeah.
We'd go to spring training, and Billy Martin would say, well, what are you doing here? I'd say, well, what do you mean doing here? He said, well, I wrote your draft board 2 weeks ago. He said, I thought you'd be drafted by now. I mean, he just had he was kidding because he knew we were in for the same position.
Right.
Oh, man.
How can people reach out to you and keep up with what you're doing these days?
I have an email, bobby.betsy@gmail.com.
Okay.
And the best way to talk to me is just leave a message.
Okay.
My flip phone, I get the messages. Email Betsy helps me with those.
If you want to give your phone number out, you can, but you do not have to.
Mine's listed.
Okay.
It's listed in the book.
All right.
I've got a deal where I've had the same phone number for 60 years, maybe more than that.
Interesting.
And it's listed in the book. And so is Betsy's phone listed, too.
I mentioned this before we started rolling, but before I got here, I went to the Bobby Richardson Sports Complex.
Okay.
What does it mean to you to have that honor here in your hometown?
Well, they wanted to build a statue, and they wanted to spend $200,000. I said, no, I don't want you to do that. And my dad was in the tombstone business, and he was able to order that little plaque. Now, the only thing I didn't like, they used a picture where I had a lot of hair, and it's not, I don't think it looks like me. Other than that, it's fine. Now, the good part is that when Betsy and I started dating and we were both Christians, I wrote in the tombstone in my own handwriting, "Only one life." Did you see that right at the bottom of the platform?
Yeah.
And the city of Sumter was very gracious and let me put that down there, no problem at all. And then there's a big thing, walk over towards the clubhouse with my signature in it. Did you see that?
Right, yeah.
Okay, but they've got 2 more complexes here that are newer and better than that now. This is a recreational town. Our YMCA is unbelievable, and the recreation is just fantastic. Jordan Montgomery is here now. He's from Sumter, the left-hand pitcher.
Right.
Starting rotation.
And Brett Gardner's a South Carolina guy.
Gardner, he's going to play 1 more year. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Did it say how much he's getting?
It's a lot.
It's amazing. They just think, when I told I was going to retire half, I'd say, well, we'll give you $9 million if you'll come play 1 more year. I'd say, sure, I'll play more.
Yeah, give me a couple weeks to get back in shape.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and
welcome.
for inviting me here. I mean, this is a real incredible thrill for me, so I can't say how much I appreciate it.
Where do you go from here?
I'm going back to Greenville.
Greenville is just a thriving little city.
Oh, yeah.
Their downtown area looks so good, and I've got a lot of friends out there. A lot of folks from Greenville have places at the beach. We spend 4 months a year, March and April, September and October, at Litchfield Beach. Now, I'm not going. My wife's on dialysis, so I'm not going this year. We'll go down for a day every 2 weeks or something like that. But my kids go. Did you see the picture when you came in right on the right there?
Yeah.
That's the whole gang.
That's a lot of people.
We all got together at Black Mountain, North Carolina last year between Christmas and New Year's for 3 days. That was fun.
Yeah. When the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum opened in 2008, you were at the grand opening. How did you get involved in that?
Well, I, of course, knew who he was, and I felt like if Ted Williams had lived another year, he'd have been in the Hall of Fame. You're right. You know about that.
Yeah.
Because Ted just knew he was innocent, and he should have been in there. And Ted died right before he could work that out. He would have, I'm sure. But Don Budden played shortstop for the Red Sox, and he was living up there. He and I can't remember the other one's name. You probably know.
Lou Brissy?
Lou Brissy.
Yeah.
What a great man he was. And the 3 of us, we were invited.
Yeah.
I can't remember why I was invited, but I have a lot of friends in Greenville, and I've got one that's a judge up there. It's a lady. She was number 1 in the class. She and my kids are all great friends, and she had a celebration of whatever her marriage was at that time and had it at the ballpark. I had hot dogs, and she invited me up for that, and we went up. Have another one that owns the Sumter Daily Item out here, and she was a stewardess on our chartered flights, and Yogi was in the back of the plane. He said, "Rich, come back here. Here's a girl that's dating somebody from Sumter, South Carolina." And I went back, and they'd broken up. I said, "Man, he owns half of Sumter. You need to get back with him." They got back together, and their 50th anniversary was in Greenville, and I went up for that, too.
Wow.
So just a lot of connections with Greenville. But I think we've covered just about everything.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and
welcome.
for inviting me here. I mean, this is a real incredible thrill for me. So this was great. I really appreciate it. All right, now it's time for a segment called What'd You Think, Mom?, where we talk to my mom who just listened to the interview with me, and we ask her what she thinks. This is my real, actual mom. Her name is Lori, but I've always just called her Mom. Can you say something to prove that you're my mom?
Yeah, so there was that time where we went on a baseball road trip, starting with the original Yankee Stadium, and I brought our tickets for our game for Fenway by accident, by mistake, by craziness. And so you and I raced from the Bronx back to Times Square, back to the Bronx with the correct tickets, which were safely ensconced in a hotel drawer, in time for the opening pitch. And yet you're still talking to me. So if that doesn't prove I'm your real mom, nothing will.
Yeah.
Okay, worst day in baseball history in the Wallach family was that. So
If that was the worst day, though, that
Yeah.
was a pretty good day.
yeah.
So what did you think of the Bobby Richardson interview?
Well, for the first time, I believe for the first time, you gave me a homework assignment, which was to watch the movie 61, which is probably one of my favorite baseball movies, but I need to be in the right frame of mind to watch it because I know how it impacts me emotionally, and you don't just sit down and say, okay, let's just have that whammy come at you. And it was the perfect movie to get me in the right frame of mind, not knowing with whom the interview was going to be. But it set the tone for getting my head in that space of that era and the greatness of it, and also introduced me to some names that came into the interview in a big way, like Ralph Houck.
Yeah, and Bob Cerv, who was
Right.
the roommate of Roger Maris and then Mickey Mantle. So that's a lesser known name to people who aren't diehard Yankee fans of that era, but obviously played a big role and had a couple shout outs in this interview of instances where his presence was an important factor.
Right, and that is a name I didn't know. Even though I've seen the movie many times, when you read a book multiple times or when you watch a movie multiple times, your first viewing, you're going for the big picture, no pun intended. The second time, you're picking up more of the nuances. And this time, I was really trying to pay attention because I was, I thought there was going to be a pop quiz afterwards. So that was someone that I needed to go and do a little bit more research on because he obviously did play a role in this movie and in the team in this way. And I needed to know more about him.
My favorite thing about the interview was, I asked Bobby if he had seen the movie, and he was like, no, I watched parts of it, but didn't really like the way that they portrayed Mickey, so I turned it off before it turned the corner. And I was like, you should watch it. And he could have very easily been like, kid, I lived it.
Yeah. This goes back to being the gracious, elegant Southern gentleman.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how I would feel if I were in his position where would you want to watch and read every single thing that comes out about that era or about your teammates? Because especially with Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris in that season, there has just been so much written and discussed about that year and that home run race and those two guys. So there's no way you could possibly read and watch everything that has come out since then. But I feel like when that movie came out, people were touting it as the best movie that had ever been made about that era, and it was so well done, and it looked right, and it sounded right, and it felt right, and the uniforms were accurate, and the actors that they got to play these guys looked like these guys.
Right.
So to hear Bobby say, like, didn't really care for that movie, it was surprising to me.
One of the things that is a running theme throughout the interview is his loyalty and his deep friendships. Obviously, some teammates are friends, but not deep friendships. But the people with whom he has deep friendships, these are friendships for life. And I think he was dismissive of that Crystal movie because he knew the real Mickey as few people did besides Mickey's family or whatever. And if you got that wrong, it's not worth my time because I know the real story.
Yeah, and I wonder if it would have been different if he had tried to watch that movie originally without his little grandchildren in the room with him, because I think that was part of the reason why he turned it off, is that the first 20 minutes or so are kind of rough, and not just in the way that they portray him, but the language that's used and things like that. So I could understand if you've got little kids in the room with you, like, all right, we can't watch this. I thought this was going to be a movie about my life, about my experiences, but that's not what this is. I wonder if he went back now and tried to watch it alone or with Betsy or, with a teammate or somebody like that, if he would give it a more fair shot and enjoy it, because the second half, it does tell the true Mickey Mantle story as far as I know. I think Bobby might know different than I did, but I think that's what Billy Crystal was so praised for, was that he did get it right. And I think even the Mantle family said he did it accurately. And yeah, it was hard to watch, but that's who Dad was. So I'd just be curious to know. I'll send him a copy in the mail and see.
When you see the credits of that movie, you see the primary contributors are the Mantle family and the Maris family.
Right.
All the individuals named.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like someone was a holdout or something like that. So you had the widows and the children. And at least the effort was made to be true to the sense of what was going on. Unfortunately, from Bobby Richardson's standpoint, the front end showed the part of Mickey that he distanced himself from when that was going on.
Right.
So he wasn't part of the rowdy crowd that was trying to lose a tail in a cab where they run in and go right through. That's a classic. I want to do that now. I want to go someplace.
I don't know if you're that agile.
Or I don't think anybody cares to follow me. I just But you see during the course of that movie where there is an evolution within Mantle's frame of mind where he actually does go live with Maris and Bob Serve, who they're living a squeaky clean life because that's who they are. They're not the rowdies either.
They were the non-drinkers.
Right. And Mantle buys into that, at least for that season. And you definitely do see the humanity part of Mickey Mantle, and you see his suffering in a very
graphic way.
That's exactly right. All right, back to Bobby. I really liked when he talked about meeting Stan Musial when he was a 12-year-old and his dad saying, go ask him for his autograph. And he gets the autograph and he can read it and he's impressed as a 12-year-old. And when he then becomes a person that another person will ask for an autograph, he makes sure his autograph is legible and you can see it with his autograph. It's beautiful. And that something made that kind of impression on him at that young of an age, and he held through, and it still is. Here he is at 85 today, and his handwriting is still beautifully legible. Another way that he talked about how things impacted him so strongly that then go on to impact his life is when he's playing on the American Legion team, and they make it to Omaha, and they take the team to go see Pride of the Yankees. And he sees this movie, and it has such an impact that he thinks, I would like to be a Yankee.
Yeah.
And there you go. That had that much of an impression on him. And here we are talking to him 50 years later about his experience of being a Yankee. And there's a lot to be proud of because he had not only a great career with them, but he built a great life of friendships and opportunity, as he said, to achieve his ultimate goals of what he wanted his life to be. And it all was because of his decision to become a New York Yankee.
Well, that just shows you what type of advantage the Yankees had back then. And they like to still think that they have that advantage today. And I'm sure they do in some respects. But every American boy growing up in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the best team in baseball was the Yankees.
It's crazy.
And so, of course, if you're a great ball player as a teenager or a high schooler or coming up, all things being equal, and before the reserve clause was gone away with, all things were equal. Teams could only offer you a certain signing bonus or a certain contract. If the Yankees were one of the teams making you the same offer that 11 or 15 or one other team made you, wouldn't you pick the Yankees?
Yeah.
And
it's the gold standard.
Right. The way that he kind of brought it up later on, though, is that he wished that maybe he hadn't signed with the Yankees because, well, now he's got to fight for a playing spot. And he didn't really think about that.
Right.
It's like, I just wanted to be on the Yankees. I didn't want to be on their minor league team. And he went in and asked for a trade. And the GM was like, stick around. Trust me.
Your turn will come.
Yeah, this is where you want to be. And I'm sure he would be kicking himself all these years later if that GM had given him the trade request.
Right.
Because
sometimes he did give the trade request.
Right. Who wants to be a Kansas City Royal?
No offense.
No offense. When you could be playing with Mickey Mantle in Yankee Stadium with Monument Park in center field.
Right.
He's got, the number of rings is obviously clearly in dispute, but he's got a bunch of rings.
Yeah.
Thanks to not being traded.
He's got some pennant rings. He's got some World Series rings.
Yeah. So that was an interesting thought process. Was you got to be on the team that you dreamt of being on, but then it was kind of it's like when you're a great high school football player today. Do you want to go play for Alabama and you're guaranteed you're going to make it to the national championship game, but maybe you're not going to start till your junior year? You know, that's the trade-off. You could go to a worse school and start all 3 years and then go to the NFL, or you can go there and fight for a spot, but get a couple rings. And that's literally the dilemma that Bobby had.
Yeah, it would be nice to be a manager of that kind of roster because so what if your number one guy is out for whatever reason? your number 2 is also an MVP candidate, so it's not an issue.
Right. Bobby kind of said this off mic. That was an advantage that Casey Stengel had. They had Elston Howard backing up Yogi Berra. And on any other team, he would have been the best player on the team, not the best catcher. He'd have been the best player. And he was second string because, it was Yogi Berra. Yeah. And so at a certain point, the Yankees had to figure out how to get both their bats in the lineup, and so they moved Yogi to left. But it was the same kind of thing with the infield, where they had all those guys, Kubek and Clete Boyer and Bobby Richardson and Phil Rizzuto at the early couple of years and Billy Martin for the early couple of years. How do you fit all those talented players into only 3 spots? It's a good problem to have. And I think that was one of the reasons why some players weren't super thrilled with Casey Stengel as a manager, was that he made these seemingly irrational decisions and didn't keep a set lineup where every day you came to the ballpark and knew, all right, I'm the starting shortstop and I'm batting first in the order, or whatever the case may be, because they had other players who wanted and deserved playing time. And so Stengel was able to make these crazy decisions like pinch hitting for a batter in the first inning of a game, and it would work out because the guy that you're pinch hitting is Enos Slaughter.
Yeah.
So Casey Stengel has a great record as a manager, but man, he was handed a golden goose and could do no wrong because the roster that he had was incredible.
Right. And even for the casual baseball fan, just listening to the names that you just reeled off, every single one of those names is mostly known, He talked about his major league debut game, August 5th, 1955, and his first comment was, he didn't touch the ball. It was 1955. That still is with him. He didn't touch the ball.
But think of how nervous you must be.
Oh, yeah. No, I know. And he did fine. He got a hit, and he was accepted in.
Yeah.
And
I kind of took that as he breathed a sigh of relief that he didn't touch the ball.
I didn't read it that way.
Oh,
I read it like, this was his chance, and he's out there, and it's like, and he didn't touch the ball the whole game.
I took it as he was so nervous that if a ball came his way, was he going to make an error? And luckily he didn't have to worry about that day because nothing came his way. We can re-listen to it. But
no, I think we need to call him up. Bobby, when you listen to this, will you let us know what you meant by that? Bobby mentioned Clete Boyer, who is this world-class third baseman and would always lose the Gold Glove to Brooks Robinson.
Right.
It made me think of how Joe Jackson is like putting up these numbers in his batting average, except for the problem of having Ty Cobb being a contemporary and taking home all the hardware.
Yeah, he has the 3rd highest batting average in the history of baseball, but never once won a batting title. That's insane.
That's insane. It was amusing how Bobby was happy that the Yankees signed Maris, and Maris was now going to be on his team, because here's somebody who is breaking up the double plays on Bobby, and now we don't have to deal with that anymore.
Right, yeah.
If you can't beat them, have them join your team.
Right, and he didn't say this, but I'm sure he wrote 100 letters asking if they could make a trade for Frank Robinson. Because the 2 instances where he got spiked pretty badly in his career breaking up a double play was Frank Robinson both times and caused 5 stitches once. So
yeah.
It was like what we talked about in the Alex Jarametta episode with Ty Cobb sliding into third base at Frank Baker. If you know that the guy is soft, you're going to get the base every time. So make him afraid. And the 3rd time, you don't have to bowl him over because he's getting out of the way.
Right.
It's a little bit of gamesmanship. And it was a different time back then. I mean, today, it would maybe happen once, but it wouldn't happen a second time.
Right.
And it sure as heck wouldn't happen a 3rd time. So, again, just a different time back then.
Baseball players apparently have long memories. Here we are in 2021, and we're talking about the pitchers and the exact innings and, everything that's going on. But I liked when he talked about the McCovey catch, and he doesn't see McCovey for 45 years, and the first words out of McCovey's mouth are, "I bet your hand still hurts."
There's a really famous Peanuts cartoon. Charles Schultz was a Giants fan, apparently. And after that World Series, the next strip was Charlie Brown saying, "Why couldn't you have just hit the ball 3 feet higher?" And then later on, there was another one that said, "Okay, just 2 feet higher." Willie McCovey said that it was the hardest ball he ever hit in his career. And it just happened to be right where Bobby Richardson had positioned himself because he was smart enough to see on the previous pitch, he smoked one down the line. So, okay, if I'm standing too far towards second base, I need to get closer to the line. And that's exactly what he did. And sure enough, he was right. He was right where he needed to be.
When you asked him about what was it like to come from a hometown with 12,000 people in Sumter, South Carolina, and then play in Yankee Stadium with 67,000, how many towns of his does he have to pull together?
5.5.
How overpowering that would have to be. So maybe you are right that he was more relieved that he didn't touch the ball that first game. Maybe, okay, let's put that in perspective. Maybe you are right.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine how nervous you would be if you were making your major league debut for any team, and then you're making it for the New York Yankees in Yankee Stadium. There couldn't be more pressure on you. So it must have been such a nerve-wracking day, especially when you know this isn't for good. You know, you're only called up because the guy who's starting ahead of you is injured for a second, and he's going to be okay eventually. So not only are you making your major league debut, but it's a temporary one, even if you play great. So if you play poorly, now you're wondering, oh, am I going to get traded to the Kansas City Royals? You know?
Oh, man. When he was talking about the old timers games that he's played in, and it's such a cool concept, but the first names he threw out, there's Tris Speaker and there's Ty Cobb, and Ty Cobb's using his locker. I think I would have to go back to that feeling of what he felt like as a 12-year-old meeting Stan Musial, and, you know, it's kind of like an out-of-body experience of, yes, it's really happening in front of your eyes, but you're still a little kid inside your body, and these are names out of Cooperstown right there in front of you.
Yeah, you're walking among the ghosts of baseball past.
Right.
And you have now become one.
Yeah.
That must be a crazy feeling. And I think that was interesting to hear him. I would ask him certain questions. I don't know if he's ever been asked those questions before, or at least questions in that way, where you could hear the wheels turning in his head, where he's processing, like, this was a pretty cool career, you know?
Right.
Like,
I thought this was a really excellent question. Today, when he hears the call of a great play that happened during his great career, does that bring back memories of his presence, and is he thinking about what his thoughts were or his emotions when that play was happening, or is he listening to it now as a fan? There's a dichotomy there, you know, what is it? And I just thought that was a great question. And that one gave him pause. He had to think about it, and the answer would be a combination. You can't abstract yourself completely, but you're not hearing that call when the play is happening and you're on the field and participating in the play, but you can hear that call today and get the excitement of it and realize how it's a play that stands out for all time. So it's a little bit of both.
Well, I think what's so special about Bobby Richardson as a person is when a lot of athletes retire, they go into a tailspin of poor mental health and poor financial health and things like that, because all they've ever known is their athletic career, and all they've ever been is an athlete. And when you think of, all right, he's 85 years old today, and he was only a major league player for 12 years. So for 73 years of his life, he was not a major league player.
Right.
Some people can't handle that. And what makes him unique is that his playing career is not his identity.
Right.
It's part of what he has done in his life, but it's not who he is.
It's just one chapter.
Right. And when I asked him the question about, are you more proud of keeping the Yankees tradition alive or starting one at USC, he said, I think of those as two separate parts of my life, you know, two different careers. Right. And that shows he's had multiple different phases in his life where he was a player for this section and he was a coach for this section.
Innings. He had different innings.
Yeah, there you go. And his work with Christianity and the church is obviously a major role in his life. So I think that has kept him grounded. And when he gets 5 letters a day or 10 letters a day, or sometimes he gets 23 letters a day, he still is like, why do people want to write to me? I'm just some guy. And it's like, no, you're Bobby Richardson.
Right, right.
You played with Mickey Mantle. You have 8 All-Star games and 5 Gold Gloves and a second place finish in the MVP voting. You are an incredible player in my favorite team's history. That's why I'm writing to you. And he still is so humble to be like, I wasn't even on their team. I was just a good player and they were the stars. And yeah, they accepted me, but I never felt like I belonged. He didn't say those words, but that's the impression I got.
Oh, and there was a space or two where he did make a comment very similar to that. So disregard the records that he still holds, or
Right.
the records of his that stood for years, or the greatest plays in Yankee history reel that he might be on. Yeah, that just was a fluke.
Right. Yeah. The 5 times it happened was a fluke.
Right. Right. He's a very loyal person, obviously with friends, but back in the day, a book came out called Ball 4 by Jim Bouton, and it was really a groundbreaking book. And I never put together that Jim Bouton would have been a contemporary and a teammate of Bobby, but he obviously was. And it was interesting to hear his perspective of being a teammate that was in the locker room, that was part of what the book was about, and how it still to this day is a breach of confidence.
And think about who these comments are coming from. This is a milkshake twin. So that
Yeah.
book didn't shine any negative light on Bobby.
Right.
But that's how fiercely loyal Bobby Richardson is that he knows the impact it had on his other teammates and
Right.
the sport in its entirety. And he's still upset. He never said the words, but you could read between the lines that
Right.
he wasn't happy with that book, and he wasn't happy that that betrayal was made.
Right. A betrayal of the loyalty, of the code among the players, and opening a door in what was a safe house. What happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. And not that you're trying to cover for people, but it's just like if you do something in your home, you're in your home. It's your safe zone. It's your safe place. And you have trust in your family, or in this case, your teammates are your family. You have trust in your teammates that they have your back. Whatever happens there, you know that they're not going to judge you and they're still going to be there for you. And he broke that trust.
Something I've heard Bobby talk about in other interviews and things over the years is that when he was first called up to the Yankees, the first 2 years they went to the World Series, and he wasn't on the World Series roster, but the team voted for him to get a share of the World Series money. And he thought that was so generous of them. And when you're a young kid starting out, that money means a lot, especially, you know, when you're a player, you've got living expenses and travel expenses, and you're starting a family and all these things. So it's just a couple $1,000s sometimes, but it makes a difference. And towards the end of his career, the conversation in the room was the opposite, where the guys would say, he was only with the team for 20 games. He doesn't deserve that money. We should take it. And he was like, I knew it was time to get out when that became the train of thought.
Right.
It wasn't about let's look out for each other because we're here every year.
Right.
What does this $2,000 mean to you and me when it's split between 20 guys, where we could just give him an extra $100 a piece, and that's going to make his life. You know, we
Right.
had the Warren Brown episode where he was the bat boy for the Cincinnati Reds in 1970 to 72. And here we are 50 years later, and that's still one of the best things that's ever happened to him.
Right.
Because he used that money to go to college, and it meant nothing to the players.
Right.
And it meant everything to him and set the tone for the rest of his life.
Especially as the years have gone on, from the time he first got the cut to when we're talking later on, and things started escalating in the financial reward system within baseball. So,
Right.
But going back to the Bouton aspect for a minute, Bobby talks about when he came back an extra year to play for Ralph Houck, and they're coming up to terms of the contract, and Bobby's like, pay me whatever you did last year. And when he gets the contract, all of a sudden it's what his salary was last year, but there's also a bonus in there that he's not expecting, which is $15,000 for 4 years for him to be an ambassador to the team. And so his question is, of course, what do I need to do to be ambassador for the team? And he finds out his only duty is that he shows up the first day of spring training, and our anti-hero here, Jim Bouton, hears that and he goes, "Yay, sign me up. I'd want to do that." How it goes over my dead body.
Just the type of person that Bobby is. I called him pretty much out of the blue to set this interview up. I had been given his number through a mutual friend who I thought had given Bobby advance notice that I was going to be calling, but apparently hadn't, which is fine. So I called, and Bobby was like, "Oh, sure, we can do an interview." And I told him, normally my interviews last about 2 hours. And he right away said, "Oh, let's try and keep it to 1. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And obviously, if you're listening to this episode, you know about the podcast, and it's a long form podcast. The interviews normally go 2 hours or more sometimes, and the episodes are pretty long and in depth. So in my prep work for all the questions and doing the research to make sure that I am prepared, I will write a million questions that I'm curious about and then whittle down to find the ones that I think flow nicely to tell a story and make sense, whether it's chronological order or just some order that makes sense.
Right.
So my first run through when I'm making all the questions, I had 7 pages worth of questions. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep this to an hour. So I had to really cut a bunch of stuff, and I got to Bobby's house, which also incredible that he invited me to his house, like no questions asked. It wasn't, where do you want to do the interview? It was, why don't you come on over and we can talk in my living room? Like,
right.
So
very generous.
So generous and just humble and kind to somebody who he's never met. I'm just some guy who called him out of the blue.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily invite somebody over to my house immediately, first phone call, no questions asked, but Bobby did. So I show up and I'm obviously prepared and have questions, and I get through all of my questions in about 65 minutes. And you can, go back and listen to the interview or just check the timestamps. It's about like the 68-minute mark is where the first time I'm like, all right, thank you so much. This was great. And he wasn't getting up and he wanted to keep talking.
Yeah.
And so thankfully I had done way more research and had a bunch more questions I wanted to ask him.
If he only knew.
But that again just showed who he was, that he was willing to keep going and was gracious and interested. And I think a lot of it had to do with, he could tell the amount of research I had done, and I wasn't just some kid coming in being like, so what was it like to play with Mickey?
Yeah.
I did ask that question,
right.
In different ways. I wanted to get that answer and have him tell stories, but it was more than that. And I think, at least I hope, he appreciated that aspect of it. So it was a very great day. And then after the interview was over, he wanted to show me his house and show me his office with all his Yankees memorabilia and photos and all sorts of things that he's kept from over the years. So that was really cool. Just a great day and a very generous, kind person. So very grateful to have Bobby's attention that day.
Absolutely. Do you think he knew what kind of Yankees fan you were when you walked in the door or by the time you walked out the door?
I don't think I made that a point. So I don't think he even thinks I am a Yankees fan. I think he just thinks I'm a baseball historian.
Yeah. You asked him which managers influenced him the most.
Mm-hmm.
His highest compliment to a manager was he was a player's coach.
Mm-hmm.
And he specifically mentioned, obviously, Bill Dickey and Ralph Houck, but that was it. It was the ones who treated him with humanity and helped him figure out the game, especially when he was starting out. And he talked about Bill Dickey. What are you thinking about when you're in the on-deck circle? What are you going to do if this happens or that happens? And, you're on the bus, you're on the train, you're on the plane, wherever you are, constantly talking about baseball, constantly throwing questions at you to get you to start thinking like a ball player, if you haven't already been there, and shaping you into the analytical mind on the field to play your position.
And it's interesting because he clearly had that way of thinking defensively. And then I even brought it up about the McCovey instance where I said, from a very young age, you're taught to always be thinking, what do I do with the ball if it comes to me? So he was clearly thinking about that stuff defensively, but it took Bill Dickey to say, nah, I need you thinking about that at the plate too.
Right.
If it's 2-1 and you've got a guy who's throwing curveballs, what pitch do you think is coming? Mm-hmm. It's the scene in Field of Dreams where Shoeless Joe's talking to Moonlight Graham. All right, the first two were high and inside. Where's the next one going to be? Either low and away or in your ear.
Right.
Look low and away, but watch out for in your ear.
Right. And actually in 61, I'm only going to bring this up because I just watched it 2 nights ago. There was that give and take with Mantle and Maris of reading pitchers and, okay, this is what is going on. This is what you can watch for. And that's the way you do it. That's part of your craft of being a baseball player.
That's the way good teams do it and good players. But that's the difference. Not everybody can pick up on the spin of a baseball or understand pitch sequencing or things like that. So the teams that can and the players that are willing to share that with one another, that's how you get success.
And you have to be generous to give a hand up to the ones behind you who are coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke to that. I think a lot of Bobby's comments were the people that he enjoyed the best friendships with were the ones who were the most kind from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he talks about Ralph Houck often. And I don't mean to go on and on about Mickey Mantle, but just the influence that Mickey had. He's like a demigod when Bobby comes up. But he takes the time to show him around and help him feel at home as opposed to the welcome that he may have gotten, which you alluded to. There were several parts where you realize that they were friends and looked out for each other, and that was a bonding experience that helped lift them through all different kinds of things and carried on well beyond their days on the field together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I wore number 7 my entire life because of Mickey Mantle, and there are millions of people around the country who look at him as, like I said in the interview, not even as a baseball player, but he's more than that. He's one of the few people who were bigger than the game. And Bobby Richardson was his friend and teammate for 12 years. When you hear Bob Costas talk at the funeral, you've got 40 and 50-year-old men who meet him one time and it's all they can talk about for decades. Or the kid who Bobby Richardson had at 8 years old and then talked to him 40 years later, the one time he met Mickey Mantle, and it's still something that he thinks about.
Right.
The most important moment in somebody's life was meeting him for 25 seconds.
Right.
And Bobby Richardson spent 12 years with him. I don't think he grasps how incredible that is. And he says it's because it all felt so natural and he was on the team. So it's not like you're not looking at him as, oh my God, it's Mickey Mantle. It's like, yeah, he plays center field and he bats 2 guys after me in the order. It's just Mick.
Right.
But to take a step back and be like, no, man, that's Mickey Mantle that you're talking about. Like, it is.
I know. But his perspective is he brings him down to the level of a man, not a deity. And that's good.
Right.
And that's why they enjoyed that relationship, because it was to that level.
Yeah.
I liked when you asked him about, what do you dream about? And what he had to say was, he's in New York, he's lost. There's going to be starting shortly at Yankee Stadium, and he's just trying to get to the stadium. He's supposed to be playing, he's not there. By the time he gets there, they're already in the 3rd inning, and he walks in and they're like, where you been?
I love the way his voice cracks when he said, I'm lost.
Right.
I was lost.
So a normal person's dream that most of us have probably had is you have a test to take and you show up late for the test in biology, in the D building at Thornridge or whatever. Not quite the same.
Right.
Even his dreams are a little bit elevated.
Yeah.
How about the thing that he had in his yearbook was that he wanted to play shortstop for the Yankees? When I was listening to the interview and he made that comment, and it sounds like, okay, wow, that's really so out there and what a pipe dream, let's say. But then in another part of the interview, you talk about the day he graduated high school, he signs a contract with the Yankees.
Yeah,
so,
he knew he was being scouted.
Yeah, there's some hint there that maybe this could be happening.
Yeah.
So maybe it was he was giving them a hint there. Going back to his loyalty to friends, he mentioned that he was a friend with Ted Williams. And when you asked about how did it happen that Bobby was at the museum's 2008 opening, and he said that he knew that if Ted had been alive a year longer, Ted would have seen to it with any power he had to make sure that Joe would have made the Hall of Fame. And if Ted was alive, he would have been at the museum opening. I interpreted that he came as Ted's representative because he knew that that was something that Ted felt so strongly about. Yeah. Besides Bobby knowing Joe's history in baseball.
And the South Carolina native,
right.
He's South Carolina through and through.
Right.
Came back home early because he wanted to spend time with his family in South Carolina, and then decided to coach at the University of South Carolina. And so it was definitely, part of that was just the pride of being from the same state.
Sure.
But yeah, the Ted Williams connection and adoration for Shoeless Joe is definitely part of it too.
So to me, the bottom line of this was getting to know Bobby Richardson as a person, and that was a good thing. If you have teammates that you become friends with while you're playing, but they are still your friends 50 years later or until the day they die, or you're asked to speak by family or by them to speak at their funerals or deliver eulogies, and you have opposing players that you played with 50 years ago that are lifelong friends. You're married and in love for 65 years. This is a man who is not afraid of commitment. He gives it his all. If you become a friend, he's got your back, and he has your back until the day he dies. This is a good man.
Yeah.
So, very cool.
Yeah. Great day. Great interview. Very happy to have been invited into his home for the day. Thank you very much, Bobby.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, so that's it. In the introduction of this episode, I mentioned a trivia question you can answer to win something. And here's how you can do that. First, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Shoeless Podcast. Then, find the pinned tweet at the top of our profile with the link to the Bobby Richardson episode, which asks this episode's trivia question. The answer to the trivia question was somewhere in this episode you just finished listening to. Retweet that tweet along with your answer, and we'll announce the winner on the next episode of the podcast. You don't have to be first, you just have to be right. But make sure you're following us. We'll pick one person who answered correctly, and they'll win their choice of an autographed copy of one of Bobby Richardson's books. The Bobby Richardson story was originally published in 1965, while Bobby was still playing for the Yankees. It's a first-person autobiography that tells Bobby's story in life and in baseball up to that point. You'll get a kick out of a number of stories and insights, especially the anecdote about Billy Martin on the bus in Kansas City. The other book you'll have the option of selecting is Bobby's memoir from 2012 called Impact Player. In that one, Bobby shares his life story, including never-before-told tales from the Yankee clubhouse during the historic 1955 to 1965 pennant runs and World Series appearances. It offers a rare glimpse into one of the most celebrated dynasties in the history of the game, and it paints a fascinating portrait of a life well lived. And what a perfect title for that one, Impact Player. When Bobby broke into the big leagues, he was only 5 feet 8 inches tall and 158 pounds. So he wasn't built to be a power hitter, and he wasn't one. During the 1960 regular season, Bobby hit only 1 home run. In fact, in all 1,449 times up at bat to that point in his career, Bobby had hit only 3 home runs total. So his first inning grand slam in Game 3 against the Pirates was a real shock to a lot of people, including himself. He added a 2-run single in the 4th inning to give him 6 RBI that game, setting the all-time World Series single-game record. If that's not impact, I'm not sure what is. To put in perspective how impressive that accomplishment was at the time, from 1903 to 1999, there were 559 World Series games played. Bobby Richardson was the only person to have a 6 RBI game. From 2000 to 2020, there have been 119 World Series games played. 3 6 RBI games have happened in that span. Kind of shows you how the game has changed over the last 20 years or so. Mickey Mantle once said about his own career, "During my 18 years, I came to bat almost 10,000 times. I struck out about 1,700 times and walked maybe 1,800 times. You figure a ball player will average about 500 at-bats a season. That means I played 7 years without ever hitting the ball." Now, it's safe to say that Bobby Richardson had a different approach. He had a walk percentage and strikeout percentage both under 5% for his career. Only 2 players who retired after him with more than 3,000 plate appearances also did that. The man liked to put the ball in play. In fact, Bobby struck out only 243 times during his entire 12-year career. He finished in the top 3 for at-bats per strikeouts 8 times in the American League, including first overall in 1964, 65, and 66, his final 3 seasons. Bobby played in 1,412 regular season baseball games and 36 World Series games. And in exactly 1 game, he struck out 3 times. That game took place on October 2nd, 1963, and it happened to be Game 1 of the 1963 World Series. And who was the dominant pitcher who was on the mound that day, giving Bobby his only game in his entire career with more than 2 strikeouts? Sandy Koufax. Bobby said during our interview that his one regret in baseball was that he didn't finish with a lifetime batting average above 270. But I hope he takes solace in the fact that his career batting average in the World Series was 305, despite Sandy Koufax's efforts. Bobby is the last person to have 200 hits and 20 sacrifice hits in the same season, which he did in 1962 when he led the American League in both categories. It's kind of fun to have someone lead the league in 2 categories that are so at odds with each other. 1, getting hits, and 2, purposely not trying to get a hit. But Bobby was definitely known more for his incredible defensive capabilities as a second baseman than his offensive prowess, winning 5 Gold Glove awards. Over the course of his career, Bobby played 1,338 games at second base, 39 games at third base, and 21 games at shortstop. So it's funny that the only game his dad ever saw him play in person, Bobby was at third, which he mentioned in the interview. That game was Game 4 of the 1958 World Series against Milwaukee, with Whitey Ford taking the mound for the Yankees and Warren Spahn pitching for the Braves. Check out the liner notes on the website where I put up a box score for that game, and take a look at some of the names in the lineup that day for both teams. It's just incredible to think that Bobby was a part of that, and how the rest of his career played out. Yankees manager and GM Ralph Houck once said about Bobby, "In short, he's the type of person I think all fathers would like to see their sons grow up to be." It was a real honor for me to talk with him, and I hope you all enjoyed our interview as much as I did. People have been messaging me for months now asking how they can help support the podcast, or if there's any merch they can get to show their friends they listen to the show. While we don't have any merchandise yet, that is something that will happen, and hopefully in the near future. But if you'd like to support the show in the meantime, you'll notice that on our website we have a donate button in the top right corner. That button will take you straight to a PayPal page where you can donate as much or as little as you'd like. Those donations will help cover the cost of hosting the new website, distributing the podcast, and paying for the giveaways we do every episode. You can find our new website at www.shoelesspodcast.com. If everybody listening to this episode right now just sent $1, it would be enough money to host the podcast and the website for 2 full years. And $1 might not seem like a lot to you, but every donation adds up and will allow me to continue putting out content like this for you to enjoy. If you have questions about my baseball history or about anything else, you can reach out on social media, submit something through the contact form on our website, or email me at shoelesspodcast@gmail.com, and I'll try to answer them in the next episode. If you want to send in video or audio recordings of your questions so I can play them on the show, that's cool too. If you have ideas for guests you'd like us to talk to on the podcast, send us your list. If you know current or former baseball players, managers, journalists, or if you are one, let's talk. A lot of you have liked and subscribed to My Baseball History, and we are so thankful for that. Some of you have even rated and reviewed the show, like Triple D at Bovine9, who recently left us a 5-star rating and said this about the show. I started listening to this podcast this year and couldn't be more pleased. This is one of the best, if not the best podcast I regularly listen to out of about 10. Why? First, it's top-notch baseball history, and more importantly, Dan is possibly the most prepared podcaster I've ever listened to. Then a special feature is his conversation with his well-informed mom on the recording. They do a great job discussing what we learned, and they're fun. I highly recommend listening. You'll be looking for it monthly. Wow, what high praise. That means so much to hear, and it's a huge help when you guys rate and review the show on whatever platform you choose to listen. 5-star ratings help our podcast get shown on more people's suggested podcast pages, which means that more people will hear our show. It just takes a couple seconds of your time, but it really helps us a lot. And of course, liking us on social media, interacting with our posts, and sharing things with your friends is great too. No matter how you choose to support us, even if it's just by listening, we appreciate you being here. Until next time, I'm Dan Wallach, and this is My Baseball History.